I've been really wanting to share this story for some time now, but haven't found a good outlet until coming across here. About 5 years ago, my wife and I went on a weekend camping trip with our two closest friends, another married couple. The campsite is just outside of Yosemite and really beautiful. The beauty of it and creepiness of it is that you take a dirt road for about an hour and a half off the main road to get to it. It's extremely secluded, but never felt threatening. It's a really popular campsite, so there's always people around, especially in the summer. The first day was awesome. I don't remember exactly what we did, but I remembered having a great time there. The campsites are fairly close together, and usually separated by various shrubs, etc. I thought we were all getting pretty pumped up about the site, as there were no neighbours around the sides, just forest, and no one occupying the site closest to us. This isn't common, as these campgrounds stay fully booked throughout the summer. Day 2 started normally. We had breakfast and then head to the lake for a couple hours. The lake was about a 20-minute hike from the main campground. We ended up getting back at around 2ish, and we noticed that the site next over to us had a silver rented car parked on it. We didn't think much of it, and went about a fire. At some point, we noticed the occupants of the site next to us. It's a pretty average looking white dude, maybe early 40s. He was so average looking that it's hard to even picture him. We all immediately caught on to the fact that he was constantly looking over at us. My friend Dave even made a comment to me under his breath saying, "You notice that guy keeps looking here." I remembered feeling uncomfortable as we're all in our bathing suits from the lake. But I make a conscious effort just to ignore it. It's worth mentioning that we're a little buzzed/drunk, not out of control, just feeling good. Throughout the afternoon and into the evening, we continued to notice the guy constantly staring at us. In hindsight, Dave or I should have called him out. The story doesn't make us look great, but whatever. I had been stressed at work prior to the trip and really didn't want to let some creepy dude throw off my relaxed vibes. The alcohol coupled with the fact that we honestly kind of felt bad for him led to us not confronting it. I just thought he was a lonely dude. Aside from the start, there were a couple of mildly weird incidents that occurred leading up to the very weird stuff. The first was that at some point, he left his site to go and do whatever. When he was gone, a girl, probably in her mid-20s, about our age, walked by it and snaps a picture of his license plate. I remember asking her if she needed anything. She smiled and awkwardly kept going. Dave and I both thought it's odd, but we're preoccupied with beer. Later in the evening, around 7ish, the camp host was doing her round checks on people. She kept checking us in and moved on to him. I remembered all of us eavesdropping intently to what they're saying. I think we just wanted to hear what this creep sounded like. He kept asking questions about the bathhouse. We didn't know there was a bathhouse, or even what a bathhouse was. But he had 100 different questions about it. Where is it? When's it open? Is it private? Which are not weird, but in context, definitely odd. The sun started to go down. We're all drunk, so weren't too concerned with the creepy dude anymore. At one point, we went for a walk and I noticed him snooping around what we believed to be the bathhouse. Now, I would call out this kind of behaviour, but again, I was drunk and 5 years stupider at the time. We all continued to laugh and talk about how creepy he was. Now we have a good time and keep drinking. At one point, the guy started eating beans aggressively out of a can in the light of his single lantern, no fire. He looked at us while doing so, and Dave and I noticed this and kind of snicker at each other about how weird it is. Eventually, compose yourself. Eventually we decided to go to bed. I think the guy had left his site at this point. I remember joking, saying, "I better not wake up to that guy looking in our window." My wife and I slept in our SUV with the seats folded down. Dave and Sarah slept in the camper shell of their truck. I remembered feeling creeped out as I fell asleep, but shrugged it off. Around 2 a.m, both my wife and I were jolted awake by what we thought was a woman's scream. We both looked at each other and asked if each other heard that. We come to the conclusion that it was probably somebody trying to be loud, and decided to go back to sleep. As I was trying to sleep, I start feeling very unsettled. I decided to get out of the car and take a look around. I checked my door, trying to be as quiet as possible. I'd gotten about one leg out of the car when I heard faint but direct whispering coming from Dave and Sarah's camper shell about 4 feet away. I froze and then heard it again. I eventually realised that they were trying to tell me something. I whispered, "What?" And I heard Dave say, "Can you hear that? Start your car." I instantly realised that something is wrong, so rather than ask questions, I climbed back into my car and started it right away. Dave and Sarah busted out of the back of the camper and frantically jumped into my car. They tell me drive. They were too freaked out to even explain anything. Eventually I pulled over, figuring we're far enough away from whatever had freaked them out. Now finally, Sarah calmed down enough to tell us what happened. As she put it, she was woken by a light coming from a creepy dude's campsite. Apparently, he had lanterns and flashlights to spotlight himself, naked, staring in our direction. It gets weirder. At some point, he turns off the lights and tries to signal across to us. I'm talking like Morse code or something. Across the ravine, an old RV begins using its headlights to signal back. Dave is awake now. I question them on this detail, and they're both very clear they were communicating. Keep in mind, it's absolutely pitch black out. After a few minutes, they heard footsteps around their car, followed by a hard tap on the window. This is what caused Sarah to scream, hence waking me up. At this point, I decide we need to call the police. The problem was, there was absolutely zero cell service at the campsite. Furthermore, it was about an hour and a half up an old camp service road that was already very remote. So leaving at night wasn't an option. We decided the best course of action was to alert the camp host. We drove around and eventually found the trailer she lived in. She was understandably confused to be woken up at 3:30 in the morning, but was responsive. She mentioned that the guy was really weird when she even checked him in, and she called the police on her satellite phone. Apparently, there was a massive wildfire burning that weekend, and the police can't even send anyone until sunrise. The camp host said there wasn't really anything she could do beyond that. It really sucked to hear that. Now, I don't know what we can do, not to mention there's still that guy in the RV. One more thing really weird happened. At around 4 a.m, we're all sitting in my car when a man in a hood walked right up to the window, and the second I noticed him, I turned on my engine and headlights. I'm not kidding you, he bolted off into the trees. We all sat in my car until sunrise, once the light was out. We went back to the site to pack up our things. His car was there with blankets hung in all the windows. The whole thing just felt gross and we wanted to get out of there, so quickly leave. After a couple of hours we left, I get a call from the police. They said they went out to the campsite and questioned the guy. He said he was simply showering. The cop told me there was nothing he could do. It was our words against his. He questioned the RV people. They said they didn't know anything, but he mentioned a quote, "A very rude camper screamed in the middle of the night." The whole experience with the police is frustrating. I tried following up. I even tried getting help from a family member who's a sheriff, but even he said there wasn't anything they could do unless that particular police chief really wanted to investigate. So there's my story. I learnt a lesson about being polite when somebody's making you feel uncomfortable. Nowadays, I'm much more aggressive with crazy people. I also know it's not easy to hear this story and wonder why Dave or myself didn't just confront the guy, especially when he's literally naked near us. I don't know. I wish I had more courage, but honestly, It's really scary in the moment, and you have no idea what their potential is. I'm okay admitting that. Clearly we were dealing with a very messed up person who had accomplices. I can only imagine their end goal. I hate to think of it. I just wish the police could have acted better. This happened in 2004 in northern Wisconsin. I was 16 at the time, out hunting deer with my dad and a friend of his, Frank. Now, I do remember this day like it was yesterday. My dad and I had a few different stands over in an area of maybe about 3/4 square mile. He had been hunting there for at least 10 years, and I'd been going with him since I was 5, up until I was about 12, which is the legal age to hunt with a rifle. This particular morning, we walked to my first stand. It's about 5 in the morning, so pretty dark out. I got situated, and my dad and Frank went off to our other 2 stands over a ridge, maybe another 600 yards off. Sitting there in the dark is always eerie. Now, not long after they left, I see a flashlight off in the direction that they left. It's always eerie in these situations. It's roughly 200 yards away now, moving in my direction. I figure they forgot something from the truck, or I don't know, so I decide to radio to see what they're doing. We're sitting in the stand. Frank's about to head to another one. He says, obviously this flashlight is somebody else. Now, this isn't super uncommon, and isn't really a big deal. The woods get crowded sometimes, and there is a spot to park in that general direction. I turn on my light so the other person knows I'm here. I ended up dozing off though, as it's pretty dark out. Now when I wake up, the sun's up. It's around 8 AM, and I sit there for a bit. I radio my dad to see if he's heard or seen anything moving. Nothing yet. There's a couple of gunshots off in the distance. I get up, go for a slow little walk to get my blood moving again. Then, not far away, maybe 30 yards out, I decide to return. When I come back to my sound, I sit down and take a real good look around. I have the feeling that I'm being watched, but nothing's going on. I finally look out to my left when I saw a big flashlight and something orange. For anyone unfamiliar, hunters have to wear blaze orange during the gun season. I radio to my dad and Frank to see if either one of them are here. My dad says no. I hear nothing from Frank, and decide to grab my binoculars out of my backpack to see if it's Frank. This is not Frank, and this guy is looking at me through his scope. Rifle aimed directly at me, which is a massive no-no. You never point your rifle at anyone, under any circumstances. Dumb people still do it though. It's few and far between, but it happens, which is why normal people like us use binoculars. At first I'm like, what an idiot. Thing is, even with me looking at him, he doesn't point the gun down. Now I'm starting to panic, thinking that he might shoot me. I slowly grab my rifle, get up, and stay behind as many trees as I can, and walk down a little path to the side of my stand. My stand is on this kind of little knot. It's on the side of a much larger hill. I radio to my dad and tell him what's up. He says sit tight and stay out of sight. Obviously, as a 16-year-old, I can't do that and keep looking. Every time I look, he's aiming at me. He's always in different spots, still moving to my direction. I go back to look again, and he would be 30 yards away from the last time. A good 10 minutes of this happen, and my dad radios to me, "How you doing, bud?" Looking back, he's obviously trying to keep me calm at the thought that something serious might happen. He's still there but keeps moving. I don't know his problem. My dad tells me just keep hidden, he'll figure it out, that he'll be coming up near him in a minute or two. That's when I hear the shot. I lose my mind trying to get hold of my dad. Did he just get shot? Where is he? Did he have to shoot this guy? What's going on? I sit there for maybe 3 minutes, feels like hours, and I hear, "Alright, coming out and head towards my stand." I peek over and I see my dad waving from alongside the ridge that the guy's been on. It turns out, Frank had been really restless and took a stroll and ended up on the other side of that particular ridge that the stranger's on, not knowing he's there. He knocked his radio batteries loose and couldn't communicate with us. Turned out the shot was actually Frank shooting a deer. My dad said as soon as Frank shot, the guy walked off from towards us, then to the logging road out of sight. I was driving late at night on the I-90 between Deer Lodge and Missoula, MT. I'm originally from Seattle, and I was driving back to Seattle after visiting family in Bozeman and Billings. The stretch of freeway between Deer Lodge and Missoula has some weird small mountain towns along either side. It's occasionally interrupted by large truck stops. Anyway, it's about 11:30 at night, and I'm on my way to my hotel in Missoula when I notice that I need some gas. I stop off in this random small town with one gas station with a 24-hour pump. It had a convenience store attached to it, but it was closed. I get this really weird vibe from the station as soon as I pull up to the pump. I hadn't turned off my car yet. I just put it in park and the engine was still running. I was about to shut off my car when, out of the corner of my eye, I see a dark figure come from the side of the closed convenience store, literally running at my car. Some instinct actually kicks in, and I pull my car back into drive and get the hell out of there. I look back in my rearview mirror to see the figure chasing after my car for a few seconds, but by that time, I make that turn and get back onto the freeway. I literally can't shake the feeling that I'm being followed for the rest of my drive either. Now this happened in 2009, so while smartphones did exist, they weren't as prevalent or as good as they are today. Even with my flip phone that I have at the time, I can't even get signal on it. Secondly, the events at the gas station happened in a span of about 20 seconds. Yeah, really quick. I arrive, park, turn off the car, see the dark figure running towards my car, and I put my car back into drive, burn rubber to get out of there, and I see the dark figure chasing after my car, tearing up on the freeway. And finally, someone mentioned the story of the Wendigo, and I've heard about it, but I wasn't isolated up in the mountains, and this was less than 30 seconds away from the freeway, so I don't really think it was that. I think the dark figure was a desperate meth head looking to rob someone or hurt someone. After you've driven hundreds of miles, your brain doesn't really think straight, but I don't know what it could have been. All I know is that it terrified me, and I still think about it to this day. I was walking on a trail in the Crater Lake to get back to my car, and as I'm doing so, I hear somebody running behind me. I look, and it's an older man by himself. I quicken my pace as the sun is setting, and it would soon be dark. He stops running, and starts up again, getting closer, and I do the same, trying to keep distance. It felt creepy, and I was so thankful when I saw another woman with a big dog not too far in front of me. I met up with her, and eventually, so did the guy. We all walk together now, and this man is very strange and socially awkward. He had a camera. I'm certain the woman and I had the same creepy feeling from the exchanges we'd given each other. She said if he came here alone, and he replies that his family's already down the hill waiting for him. I immediately felt very ill when I heard this. And then, the really weird thing happened. He took at least 3 pictures of the woman and I. I could have asked him to delete them, but honestly, he probably never would have done so, and I just wanted to get back to my car because he's making me feel very uncomfortable. We finally reached the bottom of the hill, and I noticed that there's no family in sight for him. He gets in his car alone and drives off. I felt very lucky there was another person there with me. I'm sure he was some kind of predator. So I went on a backcamping trip in some youth program in North Cascades near Seattle. One of us got hurt from falling on a rock on our way to the base camp, so I had to help carry him back to the trailhead while being accompanied by one of the leaders. On the way back, we came across another young hiker, a woman. We talked as we're kind of taking a rest. She said she was going to summit one of the peaks on the trail later. The problem is, that's about 8 hours away, and she only has a light backpack. Now the next day, back at base camp, helicopters swarmed, and men were dropping. It was like a movie. I was taken back. Little did I know, there was a huge search and rescue looking for the same woman I interacted with just hours before. For 3 days every night, all I would hear was the distant calls of men yelling out her name, echoing off the basin walls in an endless search. I remembered hearing it was supposed to be a suicide, that she was a seasoned hiker, yet she didn't pack properly enough. It didn't make sense. Perhaps she just wanted to go a little bit further than stay. I remembered after I flew home I would never stop thinking of her, and I never stopped. I still look her up, just to see that she is never found, that she's not with her family, and I hate that. You just have to be really careful when you're hiking. This was a few years ago in October, actually around the time the nationwide clown stuff was happening. It's hunting season, and I'm driving to a town north of where I live to meet my dad and ride with him in his truck. It's about 4 AM. Now when I pull off the freeway, I'm waiting for the light to turn green when I see a dude cross the road. Totally normal. I pull away and turn into the parking lot for the usual meeting spot, a park and ride situation. I turn off my car and wait for my dad. I took off towards the main road, and that's when I see a young guy walking towards my car. It's October and really cold, so I can't even see out the windows well. He just continues walking right up next to me until he's about 15 feet away from my car. He just stood there maybe for 10 minutes motionless, just staring at me. I wasn't even too spooked. Like I said, it was hunting season, so I can defend myself, but after 10 minutes, he turns around and walks away, literally never to be seen again. To this day, I still have no idea who he was or what he wanted from me. I've spent my entire life in the woods, taking regular hikes up to 20 miles on the weekends deep into canyons and headwaters of the pond, often in the dark fishing for steelhead. I also used to work building logging roads deep in the forest alone. I've seen lots of animals: cougars, bobcats, wolves, turkeys, bears. I've never been frightened, scared, or come across something I couldn't explain. My grandfather-in-law is an avid hunter. He spent his entire life doing it and told me a few stories. During one trip while hiking in a draw on Washington, somebody shot at him from the ridge. The shot put a hole in the stock of his rifle. He yelled and the guy took off, and he never caught up with him. I wonder if there's a guy out there somewhere wondering if he killed a guy. He also said to me one time, way out on a mouth-long hunt, he came across a wind chime about 100 feet off a tree. It was late fall, so all the leaves were gone, and he could clearly see it and hear it. He has no idea how it got up there. My family and I were driving from Ohio to Wyoming one holiday season to visit family about 10 years ago. Due to storms further north, we travelled straight west instead of from northwest at first, and split the trip at Omaha, staying the night before heading up through Nebraska into South Dakota. Once we're far enough north, we turned west onto I-90. At that point, it's been over an hour since we saw anyone, and we really needed a public restroom. We're on the state route, so there's no rest areas. Those of you who have travelled with a young child know that they have a bladder limit, and our daughter won't stop begging to pee. SD was similarly deserted, or even worse, as we headed west. Finally, we reached a desperately needed rest stop, as my at the time 5-year-old and I both needed to pee by then. Just as we pull in, the truck that had been following us for a while pulled in too. I didn't think too much of it at first, until I started to open my door. My head was turning to the right when the truck had parked a couple of spots over. My eyes met the driver's, and I just shivered. He was a skinny white guy with scraggly brown hair and dark eyes. I could see he was wearing a dingy/dirty blue plaid shirt. He got out of his 90s brown and cream truck and started rummaging in the bed. I told my husband I didn't want to go to the rest stop alone because the guy's giving me really weird vibes. He thought I was being a little silly but agreed to come with us. Now by this point, the next stop is Wall, SD, about 100 miles away, according to the huge billboards that we'd passed advertising, so he figured he'd better empty his bladder even though he didn't feel like he needed to. I grabbed our daughter and we headed back inside, followed by the guy who had finished rummaging around his truck but wasn't carrying anything when I glanced back. My daughter and I did our business in the women's restroom and head back to the lobby. As I expected, now my husband's already waiting out there. Now, the old guy was also in the lobby area. He was just standing there staring at my husband. My husband rushes us back to our car. As we're buckling in, he locks the doors and told me that the guy hasn't even went to the restroom. Instead, he was just standing in the lobby the whole time. He agreed with me that we might need to just get out of here and it's probably a close call. However, the story didn't end there. Remember how I mentioned Wall and it's about 100 miles away? Well, that was 100 miles of pretty empty landscape, but a decent number of turnoffs from the interstate. We didn't see the truck following us and thought the whole episode is actually behind us. Except when we stopped in Wall to grab lunch and some snacks. When we get there, we see the guy in the store not even 20 feet from us, same clothes, everything. He starts staring at us and we pay for our snacks and immediately get out of there. I can't believe the fact that he followed us for over 100 miles. Thankfully, after speeding out of there, we never saw him again, but I was seriously creeped out until we reached our relatives in Wyoming safely. I grew up poor in the mountains of southwest Virginia. We didn't really have internet. It wasn't available. We lived in rural, isolated locations, so no kid would actually go out to play with us. As a teen, I would spend most of my time hunting or riding my bike a few miles to the river to go fishing. I was a stereotypical country boy. I was and am completely comfortable at home in the woods by myself, even at night. We had hounds and I took them out alone at night to go hunt raccoons. I went to our hunting grounds and turned them loose, same as I've done lots of times before. I sat down and waited for them. We didn't have the best dogs. They were young and not trained yet. They wouldn't normally find raccoons and would try and go for a deer or a rabbit. After a few minutes, they hadn't opened, and that was very odd. I started to walk and call out for them, but I don't get a response. So this is odd. I kept walking and come out into the brush and into a cow field so I can walk easier and go call them in the next holler over. Now, a holler is a small valley in between the ridge lanes. As I come out into the cow field, I notice the entire ride line is glowing red. It was the first time that the farmer was clearing brush, and so he has a bonfire burning. I went to check it out and make sure it wasn't starting a forest fire. As I got closer to the top of the ridge, I noticed the glow was solid and not flickering like flames should. There was no smoke that I could smell. I noticed the sheer amount of light, and most of what I thought was colour is actually vibrant red. The only way I can describe it is a stoplight on a dark street that's casting a glow on everything, changing its colour to roughly that. I froze. This isn't coming off as something natural. Where I am is miles off the beaten path with definitely no electricity. It would have been possible for a lifted 4x4 truck or tractor to get there, but no way would it make this much light without a lot of vehicles lined up with their parking brakes on. I had a 20 gauge single shotgun loaded with me. It happened to have a few shells of a buckshot and some slugs in my backpack. I quickly loaded a slug and held a few shells in my hand, ready for follow-up shots, prepared to defend my life. I was terrified. I snuck home as quickly as possible without using my flashlight. I told my mum and stepdad what happened, but they brush it off, and I'm scolded for leaving the dogs in the wood. I guess they thought I was just lazy and didn't want to go after them. The next day, I went back and looked for any signs of what I might have seen. Now, there was absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. No burnt areas, no tire tracks, nothing. After a few days, I woke up and went into the living room. My stepdad was waiting for me. He jumped up and said he'd seen that light also. He'd been hunting in another location in the opposite direction, still within walking distance. He was waiting for the dogs with his light off when 3 bright flashes illuminate around him and make things glow red. He said it was bright enough that he could have read a newspaper at night. I thought it was so crazy for him to experience it too. We never had another encounter with the red light. I don't know what it was. I'm not saying it was aliens, possibly military or something, but I literally have no idea what this thing was. I visited Arizona in March of 2018 during my school's spring break. I'd already done the get drunk on the beach thing, so I figured I'd do something different. My uncle, aunt and first cousin lived in Flagstaff and they let me stay there for free, so it was perfect. What happened isn't exactly terrifying, but more unnerving. The first thing I noticed about northern Arizona was that it had a very different vibe than my home state of Pennsylvania. I never fully felt at ease the whole time I was there. Right off the bat, my uncle told me a few stories about people dying in strange ways and going missing unexplainably. Now, around 2 days into the trip, my uncle and I spent a long day exploring several interesting sites. We went to Walnut Canyon, where there are some cliff dwellings, and then to an extinct volcano called Sunset Crater, where NASA actually rehearsed the moon landings. When we're hiking up an escarpment of several hundreds of feet in lightly wooded terrain, the whole time I'm looking down at my boots because it's kind of steep and I don't want to make a wrong step. At one point, I looked up and directly in front of me is a girl in her mid-20s and a man the same age ahead of her. It was strange because even though there were trees, it was pretty wide open to the summit, and We should have seen them at some point, so this doesn't make sense. We made it to the top where there was a wide open vista, and we stopped to take pictures. The couple did too, and we struck up a conversation. It turned out they're from France and were on a PAC marriage, a type of civil marriage that's their new thing there. I was kind of geeked because I'd been to France and loved the people, so I tried some of my rusty French lingo. The girl giggled and answered back politely. I thought they seemed nice. My uncle started trash talking them to their face when he realizes that they weren't married in a church, which appalled and embarrassed me. They kind of backed off and continued taking pictures. At one moment, I looked back at the couple, and when I did, it seemed as though they froze in time. I don't know for how long. The couple was standing side by side. Now, it looked as though they were barely making contact with each other. I snapped out of it and looked away, and my uncle started making his way back towards the trail, so we hiked down and left without seeing them again. 2 days later, my uncle and I went and spent the day hiking along the rim of the Grand Canyon. At one point, a family came down the trail from ahead of us and stopped and talked to us for a minute or two. We parted ways. They went behind us. About 2 miles down the trail, the same exact couple came from just where they were before. The trail wasn't a loop. It was a straight shot along the rim, one way up and down. My uncle this time was kind of confused and confrontational, like, how was a French couple in the exact same kind of area even further up? I said if he thought it was weird, and he grunted and we continued in silence. Evening came, and we retraced our steps and almost made it back to the truck. We made one last stop at an observation deck to take in the sunset. We spent about 15 minutes there, and it was packed with people, but there was sort of a relevant hush in the air because of the beauty of the moment. I got separated from my uncle in the crowd, but it was quiet enough that I could hear my uncle loudly exclaiming and sort of jeering at someone. I followed his voice. I found it is the same French couple we'd met a couple of days earlier. I already learned that 5 million people visit the Grand Canyon, so I'm shocked now and don't say anything at all. I remember my uncle going off about their marriage again and said something like, "Go ahead and seal the deal, mate." He grabbed me and left. On the way back to the car, he said, "I have a feeling we're going to see them again." I was just like, this doesn't make any sense. We must have been about 90 miles ahead when we saw them again. Now my cousin worked in the EMS, so I didn't really get to see him for the first few days. He took me on a backcountry trip through the Navajo reservation to obscure places that I'd never been before. He's pretty adventurous. It was myself, my cousin, and a friend he had met when he was working as a guide on rafting trips through the Grand Canyon. She gave me a really bad vibe the moment I met her. She was 31, while both my cousin and I are only 22. I don't know, she was very mummy-like. We went to a bunch of different Navajo sites, and the last stop on the first day was Monument Valley. We drive up the road and set up a camp there. My cousin mentioned skinwalkers but didn't have any specific stories. He also said that he heard from a veteran emergency responder that they got a missing person report and followed footsteps into the desert with dogs on the scent trail, but the footsteps actually stopped in the middle of the desert without a trace or explanation, and the dogs went crazy when they reached a dead end. My cousin had the first 2-hand experiences when he first started EMS. He got called to a car accident in a valley leading to Sedona. The car was badly mangled. They couldn't even find a body. They end up searching the woods, and about 50 feet into the tree line, there's a man sitting against a tree, wide eyes, no visible injuries from the wreck. He said he never heard what the cause of death was. The last story was from a search for a missing person at the Grand Canyon. He was some sort of professor or geologist type researcher, and was midway down the canyon with another individual. They split up, and the professor guy said he'd meet his friend on the other side of a butte, which is a large rock overcut. The friend took a low path, and the professor cut right across. They should have met up a couple of minutes later, but the professor vanishes without a trace. My cousin said they searched for him for weeks with helicopters but never found him. If anyone's heard this story, let me know. We walked for a long while, and there were more stories that I can't fully remember. We were camped along the base of a small rock outcrop. I'd been facing towards the rocks most of the night, but before we turned in, I looked out into the desert before any darkness fell. I saw that it was as flat and as far as the eye can see. You could see for miles without obstruction. I live near a city, and at home on overcast nights, the lights from the city bounced off the clouds, giving a soft white glow. That night in the desert, I saw the same glow as if from a city off towards the horizon, lighting up from one end to the other. I asked my cousin, is there a city? And he said it's probably Vegas, but we're facing north in Utah, so it definitely isn't Vegas. I scanned 360 degrees around and it's pitch black. I finally get into the tent to try and sleep. I've never been in the desert before, so I don't know the atmosphere and what it's supposed to be like. I've read a bunch of posts about an extreme hushed silence and stillness, but I've heard about rooms built in a vacuum, devoid of any sound, and apparently the silence is painful. That's the closest to that I've ever experienced at night. There was no wind or atmospheric pressure, and I could hear my own blood pulsating in my ears and my heartbeat. The silence was painful. When I finally managed to get some sleep, I have a nightmare about a corpse being buried next to me. The next day was fine for the most part, but as soon as the night fell, I developed an excruciating headache that radiated throughout my entire body and made me feel sick to the gut. I figure it's dehydration. Even though I'd been drinking water throughout the day, I gulped down 2 lots of water and took a handful of Tylenol, but to no effect. We dropped off my cousin's friend and stopped for some food. At the time I was still a member of the Catholic Church and went to a Catholic university. My family I was staying with and some of the others we met, they would tell me I'm very Catholic and it's weird I'm out in the middle of nowhere. It seemed weird. Now, for some strange reason, my cousin took me to the empty parking lot of a Catholic church so we could order some food. It was here that he told me he felt like it was humanity's destiny to kill and make war in an endless cycle, and that he wants to join the military for that purpose. On the other hand, I'm a humanity-loving, peacenik sort of dude, so this scares the life out of me. My headache got worse, and I think I was picking up on some serious negative vibes. I couldn't eat any food and save it for the next day. Nothing else strange happened, but it was more the accumulation of things that really freaked me out on this trip. Now, as some updates, it seemed like the 2 days we spent out on the Navajo reservation, my cousin and his best friend were trying to squeeze out every last piece of sightseeing they could on the trip, and not for my sake either, but their own curiosity. It was exhausting, and I wonder if they could tell how tired I was. I have no idea what the place is called, but it's near Tuba City, Arizona apparently. It's a pretty interesting place, and it's in the absolute godforsaken middle of nowhere. Growing up, I always went to my grandma's house. My childhood had a parent with substance issues, and going to my grandma's house was the best. I had friends there, and she lived in a really nice suburb with tons of other kids my age. I made really good friends with a neighbour who had woods in his backyard. Let's call him Mike for the sake of the story. We'd often take little lunches packed by my grandma and go out into the woods and eat them, admiring the creeks and birds, collect pebbles and stuff. You know, kid stuff. This was harmless, and you could usually always see the backs of the houses when you went into the woods. I remembered one day, we made a pack. Mine was in a grocery bag and planned to venture out further than before. You know, you have limitless energy when you're young, and low pain hasn't set in yet from sitting at a desk for ages. I mean, you could literally walk for hours, and probably miles, and not even notice it. So we walk even further than ever. Now we slide down a hill. I remembered being really scared of this, and hilariously, I'm still majorly scared of falling when hiking. But anyway, I got a little scuffed up, but nothing major. Mike was slightly older than me, so I wanted to seem tough and just walk it off. We go deep into the woods, and I remembered being just slightly creeped out, but not enough to protest. I want to explore, too. This hasn't changed. This is in Western PA, I should add. We weren't in the rural areas of my state, but some of the suburbs do intersect with trails and nature preserves which can go on for acres and acres. We came upon a tent in the middle of frickin' nowhere, and I remembered being terrified. My grandma gave me a lot of freedom because I was responsible. This was in the 90s. Aside from needing to be home before the streetlights every night, stranger danger was something she drilled into my head. This set off the internal stranger danger alarm loudly, but I was too afraid to leave Mike's side. So we approached the tent, even though everything inside of me is telling me to get out of there. Mike goes up to it, and tentatively I follow him. At first, I thought somebody was camping, but it still looks more permanent than that. Anyway, there's a fire outside and smoke burning, but it's been doused. There were bones everywhere, skulls mostly, tiny ones, which, to my unattained eye, look like animal bones. There are also little pelts of animals covered everywhere in what appears to be paint and symbols. My adrenaline kicks in and I ran, Mike also. We ran so far and so fast that we fell down the side of the hill and ended up emerging from the woods on the other side of a shooting range. The men firing were screaming at us to leave. I was so scared of the tent that I didn't process the real danger which was at the shooting range. We definitely could have died very tragically because of that. So looking back on this memory, I was wondering, what the hell is this guy doing? There were literally bones everywhere and symbols. Now I dog sit for a family friend. They prefer to have somebody stay at the house with the dogs. I grew up in a town in the middle of nowhere and love the countryside. So for me, this is like a staycation, because I live in the city now and never have time to myself. Anyway, their house is out in the middle of nowhere. When I say nowhere, I really mean literally it takes 2 hours to get from work to this place. There is one neighbour within 5 miles and he lives directly across the street. I'm used to this where I'm from. It's supposed to give you the space you need, but also help keep you safer, knowing that you actually have somebody nearby. However, this guy has done nothing but make me feel unsafe as hell. So anyway, eventually I make it to Terry and Johnny's house, and they're telling me the drill, when to feed the dogs, which are 2 super cute and spoiled Australian cattle dogs, watering the plants, etc. Then, as they're loading up their stuff to take it to the car, Terry says, "Oh, don't forget to tell her about Steve." Johnny says, "Oh, yeah, don't worry about the neighbour across the street. He's harmless. He drinks a lot, but he's harmless. Hell, the guy lost his license so many times, all he can do is go up and down on a moped. However, just in case, this is where we keep the gun. Steve has 3 "Don't Tread on Me" Confederate flags, 2 plain Confederate flags which are all hanging from his porch. Of course he's weird. He then takes me to his gun and explains that it's loaded if I want to use it, so I don't even need to cock it, just pull the trigger extra hard. At this point I'm like, whatever. You keep a gun in your house when it takes at least 45 minutes for the police to show up, so I get it. Still, I've got no worries. I'm used to drunken weirdos. I know how to handle them. I love this life in the middle of nowhere, and I've got 2 protective dogs that will attack on command, so I feel pretty safe. Terry and Johnny leave around 3 PM. I took the dogs for a walk and play some frisbee and begin to unload my stuff while they're still worn out from running. As I come back out for my second load of stuff, I hear the neighbour, Steve, slam his door, seemingly having a phone conversation. I hear him go, "Where the hell did you go?" The dogs are hearing him now and growling. I tell them to stay calm. I then hear him say, "I don't care about my kids, screw you." And then he throws something on the unpaved road behind me. Turns out it's his cell phone. As I'm grabbing my stuff, the dogs start going crazy and run a few feet behind me, barking viciously. I drop my stuff and turn around to see the neighbour at the end of the driveway, 75 or 50 feet away, just staring at me. I tell the dogs to calm down and to get back on my side, and they do. I then give Steve a friendly wave, thinking this is weird. He then takes a step forward and says, "You alright?" in a manipulative voice. Steve is wearing dirty jeans, work boots, dirty red hoodie, and a red hat with Confederate flags on it. He also got brown dirty hair down to his shoulders, and a beard that's probably 5 inches long. "Yeah, I'm okay," and I say my name. I'm just here sitting Johnny and Terry's dogs for the week. I look down at the dogs to see their reaction. They look as though they're about to attack him in a way I've never seen before. "How are you?" I ask him. "I'm Steve. Thanks for being a good neighbour and checking me." "I'm good. You okay?" And silence again. Now this silence lasts for probably a whole minute, and I figure, he's wasted. I need to get inside. So I turn around and finish grabbing my stuff. As I do so, I hear him take one more step on the gravel driveway and the dogs bark again. And Steve says, "I know them. They're not gonna hurt me. They're good dogs for sure. They won't hurt me." I begin feeling very uneasy, so I close my trunk and turn around to see if he's going to say anything else. I was about to tell him that I was going inside, and then, instead, awkwardly he says, "Yeah, yeah, what?" and yelled. I'm shocked and he says, "Yeah. I'm going inside now. Have a good night." I turn around and the dogs follow me. Steve instead continues to stand where I left him for literally 15 minutes later. Now this house doesn't have a front door. There's a side door at the back. The back door is the main door because of the front of the house has these big green privacy trees, so I can't even see him through the front window. You can't see either doors from the street. You have to come onto the property to see them. It's about 6 o'clock, and where I'm at, the sun starts going down around then, but doesn't usually get dark until 9:15 during the summer. Anyway, the dogs and I are on the couch, and I have my headphones on and I'm playing Red Dead Redemption 2 online. All of a sudden, the dogs flip out, running towards the back door, barking and growling. I'm like, what the hell? They don't usually do that unless somebody pulls in their car and they don't know who it is. I'm not having anyone over, so I grab my knife, which is close by, and start walking towards the back door. The dogs are still going crazy and I have no idea what they're looking at. I don't see anything, but then I look closer. I see mock tail lights in the driveway seemingly hiding behind my car. I then try and focus in and see that Steve is turned around staring at the back of the house from his moped, ducking behind my car. I get the dogs and try and be quiet. I need to see what he's doing. The dogs are still growling, but at least I've not given away my location right now. I watch him for 5 minutes. No movement, just a general creepy stare in my direction. I don't think he can see me, I'm not sure. He then shuts off his moped and proceeds to crouch next to my car, where I can see him now peeking into my car windows. I don't see him trying to get in, which is weird. He's not crouching now. Obviously he feels like nobody's watching and doesn't care. He stops looking into my car and turns to the house. Creepy as hell. At this point I text Terry and tell her that Steve is doing some weird stuff and I'm getting worried. I get a text back saying call the cops if you feel unsafe. They know him. They can come talk to him. Reminding me to tell you about the time he was standing out by the tree at 6 AM when I was leaving for work, and he was still there when we came back. We think he had a psychotic breakout. How comforting is that? So, I talk myself down some. This guy is wasted. However, if he starts getting close to the door, I'm calling the cops. Dumb idea, looking back, because the cops can take such a long time to get here. I'm watching him as he makes his second round looking at my car. He then gets on his moped and drives off, and he passes the window that faces the driveway. He's fed up, trying to make it so I wouldn't see him if I were watching TV. Now it's like 8 PM. The dogs are going crazy again. I look out and now the moped is parked in plain view and he's standing on the walkway just 30 feet from the house, staring and talking to himself. I previously turned off all the lights so that he can't really see in. I see him take a single step towards the door, now 30 feet away. I grab the gun. I've calmed the dogs down and they're in full protective mode. One dog to my left and one to the right. It's around 8:15 PM now and I call the cops. I explain my situation and the owners think that he had a psychotic breakdown. As I'm halfway through explaining this, I'm really scared for my safety and the operator says, "Ma'am." She then says, "I'm sorry, but you're not located in our county. I have to transfer you to this one." Are you serious? The owner said that the cops in South know him very well and how to handle him. Isn't that the guy? Yes, ma'am, that is us, but you are located in a different county. This is not our jurisdiction. The guy who's bothering me lives in your county, that's why I'm calling you. And the operator transfers me to another one. When she answers a phone with the average 911, what's your emergency? I'm silent. I'm looking out the kitchen window. Steve's about 4 or 5 feet closer from before. I explain what's happening and that I was transferred because apparently I'm not in their jurisdiction. She tells me to remain calm and turn on all the lights. I said no, the guy's waiting for me to do something like that. The doors are locked. I do have a firearm. If he enters, I will shoot. She then tells me that it's safest with the lights on. I turn on the lights. He notices. He then turns around to get on his moped and goes back home. I tell her what's happened. She said, "Do I want an officer?" I say, "Hell yeah." Apparently the cops in South in this state know him, but she transferred me to you. This is the third time he's come onto this property and he's getting closer to the door and I'm not safe. Calm down, ma'am. We will still send somebody, however, based on where you're located, it's gonna take a while. I say that's fine. I say if she'll stay on the line. She says that it's not really possible because she has to take other calls, but to call back if anything else happens without hesitation. Now it's about 9 PM and the sun is getting ready to set completely. Again, the dogs are going crazy. Now I'm getting real annoyed and walking around the house with a loaded gun, so if Steve sees me, he knows I have a gun. I look out the window and see his moped, but I don't see him. Where the hell is he? From the window in the kitchen, I can't see the back door. I go upstairs. One of the dogs follows and peek through the window in the bathroom. Steve is on the back porch, lighting matches, throwing them down onto the wooden porch. He doesn't seem harmless anymore. He's talking to himself and twisting his head back and forth like he's getting warmed up for a fight, or having a conversation with multiple people. I start filming from upstairs. So now, I try and hide my phone, just in case he goes up for it. The sun is down and it's getting dark. He steps onto the door and starts knocking. He starts pounding on the door. I'm pretty good at staying calm in any situation, but my heart's beating. He then stops pounding the door, quickly turns away and runs to his moped and takes off even faster than I thought he could go. Not even a minute later, I see a cop pulling into the driveway. I mentioned to the dispatcher operator that I have 2 dogs that will bark at the officer but will not attack. They are trained to be like this. I say I'm going to leave the firearm inside when I go to meet the officer. I meet the officer and the dogs don't growl, simply gave a bark, letting me know that someone's there. I went outside to meet him and told him that the guy just took off on a moped, and he says, "Oh yeah, I think I passed him." I explained that he is absolutely drunk or crazy and in his own world, and that normal people don't act this way. The cop basically shrugs off everything and says, "Well, are you gonna stay there the night?" I said no, I will leave the dogs overnight and come back in the morning. I ask him to stay while I pack up everything. I go inside, give the dogs lots of love and treats, and create what they need for the night. I take off and return the next day with my dad. My dad begins walking the perimeter to try and show him that the man is also staying here. Now, I'm a 24-year-old female. If you're wondering, then Steve, wearing the same dirty hat and outfit while holding a 24 case of Budweisers, is standing at the end of the driveway again. I'm watching him from the front window. I see my dad at the other end, and he sees him. Steve immediately turns around and goes back into the house. Now, I later learnt that Steve has been to jail multiple times due to domestic abuse, and his kids can't even see him. He's very violent. No one knows how he gets money to get things. Terry and Johnny have never seen him leave for work. They've only seen him on his moped or 4-wheeler that he recently bought. I don't know who he thought I was, but every time he looked in my direction, I saw pure hatred in my eyes and evil intent. I'm really glad my dad came to stay with me, because God knows what would have happened if he didn't. I've been staffed at a summer camp for 5 years now. A long-standing tradition is that some of the senior staffers will regularly sneak out during night to drive into town to hang out and generally be hooligans. Me and 4 other guys pushed a car around the bend from the parking lot to avoid waking up the adults, then hopped inside and headed towards the town. After a couple of hours of jokes, by a job blast from Taco Bell, and teaching one of our goons how to drive in an empty parking lot, we're driving down country roads, joking around listening to music. That is, until we turn down a random road and something immediately feels off. It's about 3:30 AM and we start down a hill, and suddenly the road goes from asphalt to gravel to dirt. We noticed an old rusted out boat trailer on its side, a bunch of old tools, rotting piles of wood, and a general mess. When we reach the bottom of the hill, there's a big shed with a garage door that's wide open, and another shed seemingly made out of plywood with a door creaked open. There's a light just shining through, flickering from a fuse box right outside. The mood in the car changed in an instant. For a moment, we're all sat in silence, watching the flickering light. No one said anything, but we could all tell that something doesn't feel right. Eventually, to ease the tension that we're all feeling, we start to make a joke, jeering at one of our friends to go and turn the light off or open the door. However, suddenly, the door opens. The mood immediately changes. Nobody said anything. For the next few moments, they're a blur, but I can assure you that it was the fastest and early 2000s Toyota Camry has ever went off a road. All 5 of us are completely silent for the drive back. Something about the aura of that place felt off. To this day, I imagine sitting in the front seat of the car, and I start getting an uneasy feeling in my stomach. Who was behind that door? Why were they there at almost 4 in the morning? Why couldn't I see anybody else around, and why did it feel so off? Okay, so let me start by saying I'm a 23-year-old. At the time of this story, I was 19, 5'5", fat girl from England. My weight and country come into play later. So I would take my dog for walks at night. That was until this experience. Now, it's not the kind of dark where you can't see anything, but the kind where you can't make out much further in front of you. As a disclaimer, this is the middle of nowhere. We're in a village where everyone knows each other and strangers are rarely spotted. Now, a fair few of my neighbours walk late at night, and I meet most of them, and there's usually this 6'3", heavily tattooed 46-year-old man with 2 friendly big dogs, one Mastiff and another German Shepherd. We were great friends and still are. Now, on this particular night, I bumped into him, just ending his walk, which happened to be a couple of times, and it's no big worry. I'm around half an hour into my 45-minute walk in the woods, earphones in with music playing and just checking my phone to see what song's on next. I notice my dog is looking up as if he can see something. I assume it's another neighbour, fox or deer. I looked up calmly and I see a strange man standing about 20 foot away from me, holding a rifle. Not a dog. It wasn't hunting season, and this is England, so you can't really get guns unless you're a farmer, let alone a rifle. He looks angry and stares at me. At this point, I remembered my head torch, and he turns to look at me. He angles himself to my face, and at this point, I know I couldn't turn around or run since I'm out of shape. I carry on walking. As we go past, my dog gives him a wide berth, which is very unusual because he's normally friendly and loves everyone. I'm very confused by this. Now, I shuffle past him and say evening. I try and speed walk out of there. I look over my shoulder as I'm about to leave the woods. I saw he hasn't moved an inch and he's still staring at me. I never walked alone at night again. This freaked me out so much because it never happened since, and there's no hunters near me. I'm certain he was not meant to have that gun, and I'm sure I've heard a gun go off at some point around the time of my travels near then. Back in the early 90s, I was a kid, around 13 at the time of the incident. I used to stay at my grandparents' house a lot, out in a very rural area in S.E., Arkansas. When I say very rural, I mean it was a series of networked dirt roads to get to their house. The closest neighbours besides my aunt and uncle, who lived about a quarter of a mile off a dirt road, was a mile away. This was very backwards and isolated from the rest of civilization. The closest town was a 10-mile trip away. It's in the middle of farmland and mostly woods. They had lived up in this house since my mum was a child and had both grown up a ways down the dirt road. Anyway, There was a general store roughly 3 or 4 miles down the network of dirt roads. Now this is your typical country dirt road shop. It's run by an old lady and her husband, and its customers only consisted of people who lived out there. Now one day, my grandmother said to me if I wanted to walk to the general store and get some milk, eggs and a few other miscellaneous items. I said sure. She gave me some money and I headed on my way. Now it was fairly early in the day and I had plenty of time to get back before dark, which I always made sure to do when I was out roaming. Things can get pretty creepy out in the backwoods of Arkansas after nightfall. It's a darkness unlike most people have actually experienced before, due to no light pollution and not really many street lamps. Now me being a 13-year-old, had poor time management skills. I stopped at the bottom of a hill next to the small wooden bridge you have to cross and messed around at the creek creating crawdads and such. By the time I left the store, I realised it was quickly approaching night. This was fall and darkness set upon the land very early. I didn't want to be walking these lonely roads, especially not through the woods, so I go as quick as I can. I'm running and sprinting as much as possible, but it's not enough. By the time I'd made it back to the bottom of the hill near the ridge, it's almost completely dark, and there was an eerie sort of glow brought about by a very bright nearly full moon that was rising. At the top of the hill was a road that's perfectly straight and flat, with the woods on the left side and a large hill on the right. About half a mile up from the top of the hill is my grandparents' house, and you can see it from there. As I top the hill, I can see the faint glow of lights at their house. I'm starting to feel a little bit better now, but I'm still not feeling very good. The field on the right was somewhat illuminated by the glow of the moon, and my eyes have only just adjusted to the darkness. As I walk up the road, I hear something from the left, behind me on the wooded side of the road. It sounded like leaves being rustled. I turned around and see nothing at first, but then, as my eyes began to focus, I see something in the ditch, a black shadowy shape slowly moving towards me. At first I think it's a dog, but then I realise it's way too large to be one. And then I realise it wasn't actually walking on 4 legs, it was kind of crawling, like a person. I stare for a moment, out of sheer confusement, trying to figure out what I was seeing, and then a jolt of fear shudders me as it dawns on me. Whatever this thing was had been trying to sneak up on me for a while. At that exact moment, this thing stood upright out of the ditch on its 2 feet like a normal person. It had the shape of a human, but long arms, legs and such. It stood roughly 7 to 8 feet in height and was completely covered in black or maybe dark brown hair. Its face is dark in colour, and I can't really recall seeing much in the way of features. It was no bear, that's for certain, or any other kind of animal that I know for that matter. I immediately dropped the bag of stuff I'd been carrying and bolted as fast as I could, trying to get towards my grandparents' house. I heard a heavy breathing and weird sound behind me, hearing footsteps on the gravel as whatever this thing is starts to chase me. Now I didn't turn around to look because I didn't need to. I can hear it crashing into the woods, earth shattering, and some ungodly scream coming out of that thing, a sound I've never heard before. By the time I reached my grandparents, my heart felt as though it was about to explode from my chest. It's a type of adrenaline that I've never had before. I must have been sprinting as fast as possible for half a mile. I flew into the house, and in an incoherent mess of hyperactive gibberish, tried to explain to my grandparents what happened. My grandmother didn't really seem to believe me, but did believe something scared me, which annoyed me, thinking it was some kind of dog. The next morning I woke up, and I can see my grandpa sitting outside on the porch, whittling wood underneath the shaded tree in front of the yard. As he often does, I went and sat down beside him in one of the old metal lawn chairs. He's a very rational man, down to earth, grown up and hunted in that area his entire life. He knew every square inch of it, mapped out into his mind. He knew every type of critter and creature that lived in the woods, what noises they made, where to find them and how to catch them, etc. I'd only been hunting with him for a couple of years, but had been going out into these woods with him since I was pretty young, going on walks and such. He had passed a lot of knowledge down to me during those adventures. I spoke to him about what happened, and told him I knew what I saw. I wasn't being over exaggerative, and it wasn't due to my imagination. I wasn't making it up. And it definitely wasn't a dog. He knew that I wasn't some dumb 13-year-old kid. He knew what I saw was real. He stopped whittling, looked me right in the eyes and said, "I know what you saw. I've seen it there before too. There's something out in them woods that people don't understand, and that's someone that you don't want to mess with." I remember those words very clearly to those days, because it gave me affirmation, but at the same time made me realise that whatever I'd seen was very real in existence, and beyond my understanding. My grandpa then went on to tell me that far back in the woods, there are some cliffs. At the bottom of these cliffs in a cave. He told me that that cave is where the creature lived. He once stumbled upon it a long time ago while hunting. He said he was standing on the top of the cliff looking at the creature fitting the same description, and it emerged and began to scream, throwing rocks at him. He said he took a shot at it, missed, and then this thing chased him. My grandpa was on top of the cliff, so in order to get back, he had to run a distance, but luckily he managed to put some good space between them. He said the whole way back home, he felt as though he was being watched, and kept hearing twigs snap behind him. He was certain that it was following him, stalking him. He made it home, and as he reached his front porch, he turns to look towards the trees, and he can see this thing peeking out behind a tree staring at him. Later that night, he said that my grandmother awoke in the early hours of morning to find large rocks being thrown at the house, as well as hearing an unholy sound screeching out of the creature. He said he could hear it walking around on the front porch, rattling the doorknobs, banging on the windows, and it sounded like it was muttering to itself in a low, deep voice. But it didn't sound like a normal language, just a bunch of gibberish. After a while, that thing went back to throwing some more rocks and howling. So my grandpa grabbed his shotgun and fired it off, and into the darkness where this thing's running into the woods. Now, he didn't know if he'd hit it or not. He said that was the last time he ever saw or heard from it. However, over the years, farmers would report cows being mutilated, or someone's hunting dog would go unexplainably missing, or somebody would have a story about some strange creature they'd seen. He said it only scared my grandmother beyond words, and she absolutely refused to talk about it ever, or even acknowledge that it happened, which explains her acting weird about it when I told her. I know it's a pretty far-fetched story, but please believe me, this is true. And till this day, I've never actually spoken of it to anyone other than my grandpa. This happened to me over a decade ago, but I'll never forget the feeling deep in my chest, both that night and the following morning when the true nature of the situation became apparent to me. It was late December in a small Texan town. We just received 5 inches of snow in the day. I can't remember what time it was. It's dark out and I'm playing in my room. It's important to note that my room was made up of 2 rooms, a mudroom with a door leading to our front and my actual bedroom. The door was an older style wooden door with an all old wood hardware and a window on the top half. It had a window shade, but that wouldn't stop anyone from looking in if they wanted. My room was the most front-faced, with my parents being to the back of the house. I was in my mudroom playing with my Hot Wheels when I felt weird. It felt like somebody's watching me. I was facing the door at this point and look up at the window. I was trying to focus on the little openings left by the window shade. I started looking for some reason and start running. After a while, I'm sure nobody's there, so I went back to playing. A few minutes later, I get the feeling again. This time, I didn't look up at the door, but instead, I looked towards the window. I was just hoping that it's all in my head. Just then, the most terrifying thing happened. There was a noise at the door. The doorknob's being touched. I was still, facing the door, completely frozen at the sound of the metallic doorknob. I don't know why or how, but it was moving, slowly turning, testing the lock. I want to move, but I'm frozen. It was like somebody glued over every joint in my body. My chest felt like a car was parked on it. My parents weren't immediately there, so I'm all on my own now. And suddenly, the door knob is being yanked with force. The door was one that had been locked with a skeleton key, so the doorknob could move freely. There's 2 deadbolts. Whoever was on the other side just figured out the doorknob was free to open. As soon as I heard the doorknob turn all the way, I sprung up the wall about 5 feet. The door fell silent. I'm glued to the wall, unable to move. The doorknob continues to slowly move. Whoever did so started trying to budge on the door, trying to pry it open, pounding on the door with their foot, kicking it. I froze until I started screaming for my life. I sprinted to the back of the house to get my parents. They asked me what's wrong, and I said somebody's tried to break in. They ran inside and checked, not bothering to check outside, which I pleaded with them to do. They said it's my imagination running wild or an animal. They took one final look and said go to bed. It took me hours. I don't even remember going to sleep. All I remember is staring at the doorknob from my bed, never taking my eyes off of it. Suddenly, I woke up to my parents, who were obviously distressed and scared. My mum grabbed me by the shoulders, getting in front of me. She asked very sternly why I thought somebody tried to break in. When I say, they listen. I was worried about how serious they were suddenly. When I thought they said it was my imagination, they took me to the front door, then to the backyard door, and pointed to the door near the driveway. You can clearly see boot prints in the snow walking along the street. Through our yard and straight to the window, then my mudroom door. This is where I'd been playing the night prior. The police showed up and took a report, but nothing ever come of it. I was never able to sleep well in that house again. I can never forget what it felt like as a child going through this and to have my parents not believe me. I'm just glad I wasn't home alone, and thank God for the deadbolts. Red River Gorge is a beautiful and huge park full of wildlife, rock climbing, waterfalls and dense forests, gorges and beautiful views. The place feels truly isolated, disconnected from the rest of the world. One evening, my boyfriend D and I decided to go camping at the gorge. We went out and tried to find a campground that was as backwards as possible. Sites were spread far from each other. Our site, that was on the edge of a very steep drop-off. We arrived at sunset and quickly set up. By the time we fully set up, the sun had set, and we began making a fire. About 20 minutes into relaxing, we began to hear howling that doesn't go away, and it doesn't sound like it's far from us. We both freaked out by the realization that there were wolves nearby, but we tried to not overreact and continued to sit by our fire. 10 minutes later, I start hearing a faint yelling about 15 feet away past the cliff's edge. Now, I told Dee to be quiet and listen, and we're both frozen out of fear. A woman was now screaming. I couldn't make out any words at that point, but it was a deep, gurgling shriek, a noise that I've never heard a person make in my life before. Then I heard it. She was screaming, "Help, please someone help. Someone please help me," repeating this over and over again, howling at the top of her lungs. I'm terrified. She could have been turned around in the dark and fallen off the cliff. She could have been attacked by wolves or a bear or bitten by a snake. At this point we both sprinted into my car, frantically climbing inside, locking the doors. I tried calling the police but had no service. I threw the car in reverse and sped down the dirt road to find anyone that could help. The shrieks continued. I didn't make it far before I found 3 young men standing on the edge of the forest. I slowed down and cracked my window, still hearing that woman begging for help, and asking the men if they heard that. How could they have not heard it? I told them it was a young woman screaming in the forest. Then, 2 of them went sprinting into the darkness. Without questioning me or anything, the other one just stood by my car, assuring me he had no idea what was happening. While the 2 men were somewhere in the forest, I drove further down the dirt road until I found a spot to turn around at. When I came back, the screaming had stopped, and the men were back by the side of the road. I slowed down and asked them where the woman was, and one of the men that had run into the woods said, "Don't worry, it was actually just a kid messing around." I just said okay. I drove back as quickly as possible. We left the campsite and went straight home. Once out of the woods, we called the local police station multiple times to no answer. I know it wasn't a child. I've never heard such primal screams in my life. It made my skin crawl and my heart race just thinking about it. What did those men do that night? What was I a witness to? I live just where farmland meets the edge of the suburbia, on an island off the coast of BC. The climate here is sub-temperate rainforest, so the natural and untouched landscape is incredibly wild, dense and lush. I'm keen on endurance cycling, and I take full advantage of the trail network in the forest surrounding my area. I work long hours, so most of my winter rides are in complete darkness with my trusty trail light. One section of my home trail winds through a rainforest bog full of hundreds of trees. They're huge. It's absolutely beautiful in daytime. It feels like a magical place with shafts of sunlight piercing the fog, hundreds of different species of flora, and there's so many wild animals out there. It's really beautiful. Now at nights, my gut starts tightening as the thought of passing through this mile-long section of trail appears. One day about a year ago, I was lucky enough to get a chance to go for a ride through it, so I took it. It was cold and very rainy, with few other people out on the trail. I had packed thermos of hot coffee in my backpack, and I thought the rainforest-style bog was the best place to take a rest as any. Now, I chill out. I have an interest in botany, so I was looking closely at the lynches growing off of the huge Douglas fir. But suddenly, I felt distinctly not alone. No biggie. Lots of people use the trail, although not many are out there that day because the weather's so wet and cold. And that's when I heard it. A meow. That's odd because this isn't a good place for a cat to be alone. We have cougars and bears, but I hear a meow again. Except this time, it was canned and robotic sounding, like somebody playing a bad audio file of a cat. My gut starts to clench. It just sounded wrong somehow, and I can't figure out why. My hands were shaking when I unzipped my backpack to put my coffee thermo back in. I felt waves of nausea roll over me, and the air suddenly felt dense and thick. I was in a rainforest surrounded by trees and moss, but I felt like I can't get enough oxygen. I hadn't seen anyone for at least 10 miles, and I was distinctly aware of how far I was, and I couldn't really get any cell reception here either. Now, I hear the same meow again, but this time closer. I've never heard a cat like this before. It sounded like an imitation of a cat or a person saying meow. It was so tiny, cold and robotic. I now know that without hesitation, it's time for me to go immediately. I was panicked on the inside, but can't show fear, so I casually slung my leg over my bike and start riding. As soon as I got out of the bog, I ride the rest of the way home like a bat out of hell, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. I can't see anything. I will never forget this experience for as long as I live. I've had some pretty disturbing things happen on my night rides, but nothing ever like this. I hate the fact that clearly something was imitating a cat, and I'm sure it was a recording. God knows who was out that deep into the forest too. I just hope I don't encounter this again. I used to love going for long hikes in the forest near where I live. I usually did it on summer's evenings. Yeah, I know this probably isn't the safest thing to do, but I always had my hunting rifle on me anyway. I mean, I'd be stupid not to. All it takes is one wild animal to go for you, and if you're unarmed, good luck to you. So anyway, I set out one summer's evening. I had my iPod playing some really chill songs and I felt really good about myself. I can't really get cell phone signal where I go because the trees cover it, but I like listening to my music. Now I was a good 40 minutes into my hike. There was enough moonlight for me to see where I was going. That's how I normally planned my hikes, when the moon was out of its brightest on the most clear days, so I can see everything. I'm really enjoying myself this night. I found true tranquility. I decided to stop for a minute, take off my headphones, and just pour out some of the hot chocolate I had in my flask. Now the second I do this, I have the feeling that I'm not alone, and I can't describe this feeling. It's almost like I'm comfortable in my own presence, but I don't want to be joined by anyone else, and this unsettles me. I just think I'm just being a little paranoid. I say to myself, thank God I've got my rifle, and I could have sworn I heard a laugh afterwards. No, it must have been just an animal, surely. So I go about drinking my hot chocolate. As I do so, and I'll never forget this, I hear someone whisper behind me, "Mind if I have some?" And a terrifying laugh follow. Now the next few seconds is a complete blur as I fumble, fall over getting up, grab my rifle, and scream myself and sprint in the complete opposite direction to where I heard the voice and back onto the trail. I try and scream out that I have a gun, but I can't get the words out. What's worse is I hear rustling behind me. I continue sprinting up the trail, only to slip temporarily again, and now on my back. I lay there wondering whether it's better to pretend I'm still. I look behind me, and I can see what appears to be the butt of a cigarette lit in the distance. Well, looks like I'm going to keep moving then. I get up again, and scream I have a gun and I'm not afraid to use it. What's worse, I'm sure I hear laughter in the distance after saying this. I sprint all the way back to my car. I don't even bother going back for my flask for anything. I immediately get on my radio and call it into the park rangers in the area, who say they're going to check it out and they want me to show them exactly where it is. I say you've got no chance and speed out of there. And the whole drive home, I can't stop thinking, who in their right mind was out there? How long were they stalking me for, and what on earth did they want? They clearly weren't mentally sane, whoever or whatever this was. Now, I don't believe in the paranormal, but this could have easily been something like that, because why would you be out there with no torch or anything? Maybe it is an insane person. All I know is that I never got to the bottom of it, and I never went out on my own in the woods at night again. I come from a big country family. We live on a farm. We raise our own food and meat animals, and we hunt and process. My dad's first cousin is even a licensed taxidermist, so we get a lot of hunting in. For a bit of backstory, on the homestead I grew up on and that we still live in, it was my parents, my pop's first cousin and his wife, me and my 4 sisters, and my 4 female second cousins. So 4 adults and 9 kids. And sometimes my pop's brothers come to stay with us too, especially during the hunting season. So hunting season is on, and my pops and his brother and the cousins we live with are all getting ready to go hunting. Some of the kids decide to tag along with me, my sister and my cousin. We get permission from one of my uncle's friends to hunt his lands away, and it's basically on several hundreds of acres of forest. Now, an important fact, during the time we're setting up, my pops and uncles are quiet while the 3 of us kids talk, and my voice hasn't changed. This is important. Us kids keep chatting away while the adults are just getting louder and feeling more energy while they check out the survival equipment, making sure the guns are clean and working, etc. Now there's a rustling in the thick brush around us, and suddenly 3 creepy looking guys enter the clearing. They literally stop dead. One of them has a hand on his knife on his belt. They're clearly drunk as hell. They kept looking between A and S and my pops and uncle, like debating something. My pops and uncle stand up. Last bit of backstory, every guy in my family is huge. I'm 19 and 6'5". My dad is 6'10" and 280 pounds, Jesus. Just deeply intimidating men. And so are my uncles. The guys laugh nervously as my Uncle V picks up one of his rifles, pointing it at them. The dudes start running off into the clearing like the devil's after them. My pops immediately says we're clearing out. My uncles don't question it, and neither do we. We're freaking out, and we're totally scared now. I mean, we're taking things down really sloppily, but my pops doesn't say anything about us messing up the camping equipment. When we get back, we instantly call the police, who unfortunately don't take it serious. We also told the owner of the land to be careful of his kids. The craziest thing is that, at that moment I realised A and S and me, with my unchanged voices, are the only voices that these guys would have heard, so they clearly come across here, trying to find some children on their own. Just down the road from where I lived a few years ago, in southeast Australia, is an opening into about 100 acres of woodlands and bush that I frequently went into when I was younger to do the usual things, riding and camping, etc. I was out driving at around 11:30 with my girlfriend, and as we're in the area, I decided to show her the woodlands while we sat in the area, as she enjoys everything to do with nature. And it's still summer, so it's an extremely warm night. I left my car with the light shining into the trees as we weren't going too far in, and it was pitch black inside, and the 2 of us just kind of sat around chatting and just relaxing. She was sitting on a sort of map of the area that had been used before, and there was some plastic around us. I kept getting this feeling like we're being watched though. Now I've read on here a few people have said that they felt like they're in danger, although nothing around them was off. Everything was fine, apart from the feeling I had, and I just can't explain it. After lighting another cigarette, my nerves are calmed. I scan the tree line again and realise that it looked different than before. It was only after starting into the dark that I saw that there was now moonlight, lighting up all around us, and I can see a black shape blocking where we come from before. This I didn't see before. I've got goosebumps just typing this, but the only way to describe it is that all sound just ceased and everything went dead silent for a few seconds. I had this disgusting feeling of dread coming over me as I saw motion in the dark path, as something literally crawls towards us on all fours. Now, I've seen nearly every animal in the outback here, and we don't have any large predators like in the US or Europe, but somehow I knew this thing was a predator, and it wasn't hiding from us, and it starts slowly coming towards us, clearly hunting. Now, I don't know if my girlfriend saw it or not, as it was kind of dark, but I saw that thing get off on its two legs, just staring at us. Now, I'm 6'4", and this thing was about another half meter larger than me, with arms that were far too long. I mean, they're literally reaching the ground. I'm terrified now. All I can make out was an off-white, almost yellowish fur colour it had, and a strange wolf-like head. I wasn't able to move as it stared at me, but it's at this point that my girlfriend gasped, which seems to break the silence between us. I grab her arm, and we sprint to the car, slam into the doors. This thing is tearing after us too. We both screamed. We tear out of there quick, not even looking back. It took us half an hour to calm down enough to talk about what we had seen. We both discussed it many times and know what we saw wasn't fake. We still have no explanation to it to this day. It's really scared me, and I've never went back to that area since. I always used to go camping a few years ago. I stopped doing it as much recently because of work, but I still get out there on the odd occasion, and I love it. I never had anything weird happen to me while I was actually camping. Some of the strangest things would happen when I was driving. It was never too bad. I'd just see strange lights in the sky, but I was sure that was just because I was tired. There was one thing I could never explain though, however. So I was driving back from a camping trip one summer's evening when I see somebody standing in the road. I don't know what they're doing, so I slowly drive up to them. They're not facing me, they're facing directly away from me. I turn my lights on to try and let them know that I'm there, but they don't move. I stop my car and get out and I say, "Hey bud, I need you to move out of the road for me please, is everything okay?" And I'm not kidding you, the second I finish my sentence, they fall to the ground. Well, I say they, all of their clothes do. It's almost like somebody just disappeared. I rub my eyes and I'm sure that I'm just sleep deprived and hallucinating, and I get back in my truck and slowly drive towards it. To my horror, I can see only a pool of blood exactly where I thought the person was standing, but it's dried blood like it's been there for weeks. I have no idea what it is. I immediately do a U-turn, scream to myself for what felt like an eternity, and get the hell out of there. To this day, I still have no idea what happened or who that was. There was nowhere for them to have run, and if they did, I would have saw footsteps in the dirt. There was neither. The drive home from work was always a long one for me. I had to drive through miles of woodland roads completely on my own. It was about an hour's drive, but I got used to it. I used to get finished on my night shift at about 10 o'clock, and I'd always turn on the radio and just enjoy my drive. There was one cold winter's night in December that really shook me up though, however. So I'm about 10 minutes into the drive, trying to demist my dashboard, when suddenly I have a feeling come over me like I'm being watched, and I can't shake it. It's a weird feeling, but it went away after a few minutes, and as I'm driving, I suddenly realise that I've lost my power steering. That's odd. It normally comes on again if this happens, which it rarely does, but then I see my lights go off and my engine cut out. It was almost like somebody let off an EMP in the atmosphere. Everything just stops, and I crawl to a halt. I'm confused out of my mind, but I'm not scared. Now as I'm sitting there, I become aware of just how dark it is around me. It's literally pitch black because of the trees. 10 seconds later, the radio comes on, and I can hear a staticky voice saying, "Please don't be scared." And suddenly, my engine comes back on without me turning the ignition, and everything else goes back to normal. Needless to say that I was terrified in this moment. I drive back home as quick as I possibly can. Nothing like it ever happened since, and I still have no explanation to it to this day. I grew up in the south. There's tons and tons of beautiful places to see that haven't been taken over by concrete yet. It's nice. But along with that, it's pretty boring. Being a teenager and wanting to go out and have fun led to mostly improvising with your buddies and hoping that something good can come out of the night. There wasn't really a local spot to go and hang out at, like a club or cool bar, and the places that were close to us were boring, because we'd went to them so often. I'm sure if you've ever lived in a rural area, you can understand it. Something that I found a ton of enjoyment in as a team was just cruising around super late at night listening to music. I would fill up my gas tank, grab something to drink, and I'd just drive off until the sun comes up. It was a way to clear my head and relax. Those country roads are always fun to drive down at 2 AM, and was just also the right amount of spooky. I don't know why that made me laugh. Well, one night, I absolutely got more than I bargained for. I can't remember what month it was exactly, but I knew for a fact it was in the summertime, because I was out of school, and I also remember it being a comforting, chilled night. So, if I was to guess, it was probably around July or August. I was cruising around like I always did, and was completely worry-free. I had music blaring, and I'm in my zone. I decided to head down and park just out of boredom. This particular park is at the end of a very long stretch of desolated country road, but 'tis a really pretty drive because of that. When I say desolate country road, I don't mean that it's some dirt road that goes through the woods or anything crazy. It's a normal paved road, but there really is nothing on it after a certain point. The entire road takes about 20 minutes to drive down, and to get to the park after about 10 minutes into the drive. That's where the houses start spreading out further and further before there's none, and just a road leading to a park. I think a lot of the reason I like this drive is, at night, it's so creepy, and there's really no getting over that. I love the adventure of it. Now, the park isn't open for camping or anything. It's mostly just lots of land with walking trails and biking trails set up through miles of woodland. So obviously at around 3 AM in the morning, it's pretty dead. I made it there and just did a slow normal loop around the park. The night before it stormed so badly, so I remember my parents and I had to take shelter because of the threat of a tornado. There ended up being no tornado, but the storms were pretty rough. Because of it, I come up on a fallen tree in the road that looped around to the exit of the park that must have been caused by the storm. It wasn't some massive tree or anything, but I knew for a fact that there was no way it could have gotten there from a car, obviously. It was pitch black everywhere besides the front of my car because of my headlights, and because of that, I immediately ruled out backing up the entire way. I just drove when I entered the park. I knew that this was super dangerous and there was no way. At this point on the road, there was flat land on each side of me. I figured that it would make the most sense just to back up to the grass beside me, just a little, and then drive back the way I come. It was a one-way loop around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going out and the wrong way because it's so late. So now I start to back off the road so I can get my car to turn around. All was good until I pull off onto the road. I totally didn't take into account how wet the grass was and the amount of mud there is. My car went absolutely nowhere. My back tyres are completely stuck and were spinning in places where I didn't think they could. I start getting scared now. It really isn't the most ideal of situations to be in. I immediately take my cell phone out of my pocket and saw that I had service, which comes as a massive relief. I call my parents and tell them what's happening and where I was. I'm pretty annoyed, but they said that they're going to pay for the tow truck to get me. My parents both drove their small 4-door sedans, and they said that they would be zero help in the situation that I'm in. It was about 45 minutes away from my home and most of human civilization, so I was pretty sure I'm going to be stuck there for at least an hour before someone comes to get me. It's a freaky feeling. But I try getting out of my head and just continue listening to music and playing on my phone. Not really a lot I can do. After I kind of calmed down from the initial anger I had, I started to check out my surroundings. I didn't even notice at first because everything's going on, but in front of my car's placement was a field that's full of deer. It's the most I've ever seen in my life. There legitimately must have been 40 deer just walking around eating grass. The field wasn't directly in front of my car, but if I was to get out and throw a rock, I would have easily hit one. So if I'm gonna guess, they're probably about 30 yards away. I watch them for a little bit, but I'm quickly over it and start browsing through my socials on my phone. They seem to have been over it quicker than I was because they all go back to eating grass after figuring out I'm not going to attack them. After browsing my phone for 15 minutes, I finally get a call back from my parents letting me know that the tow truck guy's coming. He's about an hour and a half away. Still to this day, I remembered hearing that and thinking, you've got to be kidding me. I understood that me and only me is the reason that I'm in this situation, so I can't complain. But I mean, come on. I decide that the smartest thing to do now is to make sure all the doors are locked and lay back and sleep for a bit. So that's what I do. Okay, here we go. So I wake up 45 minutes later to the feeling of being watched. I'm not sure if anyone has ever experienced it before. I don't know how common it is, but it's almost like a sixth sense was going off in my head telling me I need to wake up. Now. Waking up to that feeling in that situation is horrifying. I sit up and immediately check my surroundings to see nothing. I look through my car very quickly for any kind of weapon and find a pocket knife. A pocket knife. Great. I'm really scared now, even though I haven't saw or heard from anyone. I was shocked to see that the field of deers in front of me was still full. I don't know anything about the animal, but I guess they were just gonna move. But they're motionless. I call my parents back to see if they've heard anything. I decide not to mention how scared I am because I know it's gonna worry them. And there's no updates from the tow truck guy, so this can't be much worse. The last call just lasted a few minutes, and I felt like an idiot. They both had to wake up for work quickly after, and now they've spent over $100 to try and get me home, and they're worried about me. We hung up, and I looked up from the phone and immediately went from 0 to 100 in a panic. All of the deer in front of me had perked up, staring in the same direction in front of them. Every single one of them. One of them stopped dead in their tracks, standing completely still. The others followed, looking at something. I put my high beams on and stared, waiting for absolutely anything to happen. But there's nothing. I tap my horn real quick. They don't even budge. That's what scares me. They were completely glued to what was in front of them instead of being scared by me. I know they were looking into the woods, but where I was, I can only see them. I can hear my heartbeat, and I grabbed my pocket knife and just waited for something to happen. I would say it was about a minute after I honked. Every single one of them in unison ran the opposite direction that I'm in. And now within 10 seconds, it's completely empty with just me in the field. I'm petrified in fear. I knew that staying in my car would be the safest thing, but I'm now stuck. My head is on a swivel. I'm freaking out in every possible way. I assumed that it's a bear or something, but it could have been absolutely anything. I was convinced at that point that it's the devil himself. I don't know what to do now. I knew that the tow truck was close by, but I have no idea where. I start shaking because of nerves, and just look around me to make sure nothing was by me, and focusing on the field in front of me. I did this for what felt like an actual eternity, sitting in complete silence and darkness in the middle of nowhere, waiting for something to jump out and attack me. Now 15 of the longest minutes of my life go by, and I start to see lights break through the tree line on the road. As it gets closer, I see it's a tow truck guy. The lights on in his truck feel like Jesus coming. He gets up to me and I jump out of the car and say, "Do you have a gun?" I tell him what's happened, and he said something's definitely nearby. He let me know that he grabbed his shotgun in the truck and assured me that it's probably a bear or bobcat. He gave me the whole "they're more scared of you than you're of them" crap. The tree was small enough for him to sort of bulldoze it out of the way, and hooked up my car. He wasn't really listening to what I was saying about the story, but knew I was shaken up from it. The whole time, I still had my eyes glued on the field looking for anything. He was completely done with everything in about 15 minutes, and he told me that to follow his truck out of there and onto the main road's the best bet. I got in my car and was ready more than anything to get out of there. We start to move away from the spot I'm in, and I still have my head on a swivel, completely shaken up. As we're driving away, I look in my rear view, and just out of the way, I could see the partially lit up spot where I was from the vehicle lights. I watch in my rear view mirror as a man comes out of the tree line behind my car and walks into the middle of the road watching us. He's a huge person too. My heart stops. I legitimately start bawling out of fear. I can't see any details of the man. I don't care about that, honestly. The feeling when we're driving away was the worst of my life. He stands there the whole time. Now he was there watching me, creeping up on me when I'm completely alone for a very long time. Maybe even coming up to my window watching me sleep. That's a feeling that I can't quite put into words. The entire time we're driving off, as long as I can see him, he doesn't move. He just watches. A million things are racing through my mind now. I was scared that there might have been multiple people waiting for us. I was trying to figure out if I should start beating on my horn or what. I decide all I want to do though is get out of there, more than anything. The second we finally got out of the park and was able to be on two roads, I drive past the tow truck driver doing at least 70 miles per hour. I run inside, quickly saying sorry to my parents and nothing more, run into my room, not sleeping for a single second that night. I was searching everywhere for what could have happened, escaped convicts, whatever, and I've come to the conclusion that I'm never going to know who was out there or what they were planning to do to me. I never told my parents this story either until years after, and it freaked them out when I told them it, even in my older age. I never went back to that park ever again, and I never will for as long as I live. Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night. As my friends and I are quite the night owls, we love the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads or the paths we frequented. Even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in such a rural area. And you could see or hear them coming from very far away due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicle disrupting the peace. We were really into it at the time, and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, not seeing anyone until the sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads to take one of our favourite hidden routes. It began with a narrow, paved path that was the only piece of land separating two sides of a long lake. It would often sink under due to rain, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to use it before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long and extremely relaxing to ride through due to scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to keep moving and continue on our way and turn into a very close path that leads into a densely wooded area of a national park. As we came up to the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny ball of light moving down there. At first we think it's a park ranger, but it moves so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it is. Rather than shine our flashlights down, we curiously watched out for a few moments, whispering to each other what it could be. And all at once, that small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds. Overwhelming our senses as to become accustomed to the darkness and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off the path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of a hill overlooking where we just come from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the plants and darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers ride out to where we originally were standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4-wheelers, 2 on motorbikes, each other yelling something, but we can't make out what they're saying due to the distance. We felt safe enough to whisper softly to each other and speculate who these people could have been. Our first thought was that they might be park rangers of some kind, although we've never seen any in here, and we've been here a lot of times. And honestly, we doubted that this country had the budget for them this deep, unless they're on a big manhunt or something, which has happened in neighbouring states. Besides, these men are on vehicles that are inappropriate for paved bike trails. They're very angry too, and we don't know why. They call out for us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're there, and we can see you, come out." We stay silent and decide to call on their bluffing instead of running. Eventually, I heard one of the men yell, "Find them now," and smash a bottle. That had erased any hope that they're rangers. We watched them split up, and each of them gone a different way down a series of paths on their vehicles, including the one that we've just come from. It took us what felt like ages to move. We're frozen in fear in that dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travelling through the woods and paths. One of them already come in full circle and passing the point that we started on. I thought about calling for help, but I was too afraid. I was scared that the smallest amount of sound would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach our furthest distance yet, We finally summoned the nerve to get up and to run somewhere far enough away from them to make a call. We ran as hard and fast as we can through the woods, since their headlights gave their locations away on the paths. We would hide again whenever we felt like they're close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woodland became less dense, and the fear is overwhelming. Finally though, we emerged from the woods onto the intersection of the two main roads, far enough away from where we started. We ducked down into the ditch to call for help. I opened my phone. I noticed I had recent missed calls from one of our friends, Connor, who we're supposed to meet up with after our longboarding excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he is. Luck's with us again, and he hadn't given up on our plans despite us ignoring him. He's only a few miles away now, already heading in our direction. I gave him the names of two of the streets we're near. I explained that we need to be picked up immediately. He agrees to speed over to us while Justin and I were waiting and hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of them men did. We bolted into the back seat of his car, yelling for him to get out of there. He took off fast. Relief doesn't begin to explain how I felt after being safely driven home. After explaining everything that happened to Connor, we ended up just moving on with our night and decided not to call the police. We figured they'd be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and that we're putting ourselves at risk by admitting that we were breaking the law being out there. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the Reverend started, we could see our minds going to Chainsaw Killer or something worse. Frustratingly enough, whatever them weird men saw that made them want to chase us so bad, we actually never saw, so they even had no reason to chase us. I never found out what they were actually doing or why they're so angry at us. I just know we're in a very dangerous situation, and to be honest, we're probably lucky to make it out of there alive. Me and my friend John loved to go for hikes in a national park that was a couple of hours drive away from where we lived. We'd often end up camping overnight. We'd always bring our camping gear in case we didn't make it back in time off the trail and it was dark. Now we usually did this in summer evenings. Oftentimes we'd never encounter anyone else except for the odd park ranger. It was normally nice to see them, and we'd have a good laugh for a little bit. I always respected park rangers and embraced them when I saw them. Now we set out on this one hike during one summer's evening 2 years ago. We're having a really good time. We're just talking about life. My friend's talking about not really liking his job much, and he's complaining about the hours and the work they have him do. He works in a hospital and really doesn't enjoy it, and I felt pretty bad for him. He's only starting and they're making him do all the dirty work pretty much. I wasn't too happy in my life either at the time. I had some big changes coming, and I was waiting on people, and I hate waiting. I really can't stand it. So we're talking about this for hours, and honestly, it's like a therapy session, and I really enjoy it. We keep walking and we're talking about the highs and lows of life, things that are coming, and things that we just want to see change. We're both saying it's surprising how that this time next year, we have no idea where we're going to be or what we're going to be doing. We're just putting the work in now. As we finish talking, we realise it's nightfall and there's already moonlight illuminating around us. I love moonlight, and we say, hey, how about we set up camp? John agrees. We walk further down, and just as we think we found a good camping spot, we see another tent further up. Now there's this horrible smell there, so we're sure that whoever this is has hunted an animal, and they've left it out there, which is kind of disgusting, but they might be skinning it, getting it ready to eat. My friend goes over to say hello, and just say that not to worry about us, we're going to move further away so he can have his own space. And what do you know? A park ranger appears. You can see his hat from a mile away. As we go over there, we realise that there's something not quite right about this ranger. We can't really tell what. He doesn't have a normal uniform on. Well, he has a hat at least, but he has a big coat on. It's not cold enough for a coat. He says very few words when he speaks to us. He just says, yeah, I'm just setting up camp. We're out looking for someone, and that we should leave. I end up talking to him for a little while, and a lot of what he's saying doesn't make sense, and I get this really weird vibe from him. Like he's looking at me, but he's not, and he's trying to look through me at the same time, if that makes sense. He says, are we armed? And we say, yeah, we've both got hunting rifles, but we got a permit. He asks to see it, and my buddy shows him his. He says, that's okay, you haven't got to get yours out to me. And then John says that we need to get moving and should probably set up camp. He says fine, and the second he turns around, my buddy John grabs me hard by the arm and starts walking really fast, guiding me. Now I'm confused because, well, we're out in the middle of nowhere in a national park. There's going to be lots of places we can go and set up our camp. But there was something different about the way he grabbed me. It felt really urgent. I can't describe it. I don't need to know any more about the situation, and I should start to lightly jog with him. The second we're away from the camp, I turn back and I can see the ranger still watching us. He's standing in the exact same spot as before though, which is something I find very odd. The second that we get over this hill, John says run, and I don't question it, and we start sprinting as fast as we can back the way we've come. He starts telling me, I don't think that's a park ranger. I say, what? You're kidding me? He says, no, just run. And we run for miles and have to stop eventually to catch up with our breaths. He says, I don't think that was a dead animal we could smell, and that guy definitely wasn't a park ranger. I said, how'd you know? He's just wearing a coat. He said when he looked at our permits, he didn't even look. And then he said it was fine, and a park ranger would have to check both of us had permits, pretty much. I got a horrible sinking feeling in my stomach as I remember turning round and looking at the park ranger just standing there staring at us, and a lot of what he said didn't make sense. God, it all clicked now. We continued hiking into the morning and eventually make it back to our car. We drive immediately to the park ranger station, and the park rangers there say that nobody's out in that area and they're definitely not camping. Eventually, they sent out some people to go and investigate and got the police involved. It turned out that they suspect that this guy had murdered someone, and where we encountered him, he moved everything and hid the body. The police are still out there looking for it today. I had a long career spanning many different things, and I wore lots of different hats throughout my time. Now, some of the most interesting ones happened when I was a lot younger than I am now. I remembered a job that I truly enjoyed and still felt pride about doing, even to this day, was when I was a fire ranger. Now, it basically meant I'd have to brave the scary stairs going up to the top of those big old towers, and just keeping a watch out for anything that could be potentially dangerous or a fire. A lot of people don't realise we do more than just look for fires specifically up there, and it's a relatively difficult job because you have to look out for other people and other things you might not think about. And of course you have to try and stay sane up there yourself and make sure that you're not seeing things. Now this is actually quite difficult to do, especially if you spend all of your time alone there. Now, most of the time I was there, I thoroughly enjoyed the experience, so sometimes I guess the isolation or loneliness would get to me. If ever it got like that, I'd just go down for a little while and just start reading books for a few minutes while periodically looking around to make sure there wasn't anything out of the ordinary. Now, there'd been a rumour going round for years about some kind of figure with a dark robe that would just appear in the background, and you could kind of see through it. It would be hard to describe, but it was almost like when the setting was very dark, this would stand out as being completely out of the ordinary. People described it as a child kind of facing away from you and slowly fading off into the trees. Originally I didn't really believe it too much. I was more worried about another issue we had. There was an old cabin out there, right in the middle of nowhere in the area that we would cover, and there would always be reports of an elderly gentleman sitting down at the table who would seemingly be completely oblivious to everyone else. Whenever we went out there to actually go and figure out what was going on or say, hey, you're not meant to be there, he would seemingly disappear as soon as you got close. For a while we wondered if it was an optical illusion, and we actually took out all of the remaining furniture from in there, but he kept on appearing. That was up until there was a really big fire there. What made this place really interesting though is that once it had all burnt down, you could see a basement that we didn't know existed, and there's still some of the path to get down into it now. But anyway, that's the story for another time. Today I'd like to share this one with you. I'd been doing my shift for a while now, and not much was out of the ordinary. We did have something weird that I had to investigate at one point. It was probably about 1 o'clock in the afternoon and everything was normal. Like I said, nothing was out of the ordinary this day, and it's actually quite peaceful. It was relatively cold out during this moment, and I had a report from some people hiking that apparently they'd seen strange figures not moving out in the forest. I felt, oh god, this is great, this is just what I need when everything's going so well. Kind of hesitant to believe what they're actually seeing and worried that maybe they'll come across a dead body, I decided to investigate. Now the problem is, when I was trying to investigate this, they couldn't really tell me the location they're in. They actually needed help getting back to the main areas. This was actually relatively annoying because it meant I had to spend about 10 days trying to give them directions. Of course it's an exaggeration, but when there's not really reference points, it becomes increasingly difficult for people to know where you're talking about, especially out here, but that's understandable. I eventually wave them off and call in that I need to go and investigate something, and they say it's fine, they're going to cover me for a bit. I have to wait for a while for the other ranger to come over and quickly get into my tower so I can go out there. I tell them that it's potentially a body, and they say just proceed with caution because you don't know who's out there. After waiting for a good half hour or so, eventually my cover came. We said hey, and the other ranger said, do you want to take the truck out, it's already running? I said sure. I got in and immediately some sound blasted my eardrum. It scared the life out of me. I took a second before I realised that he had the radio on absolute blast, and honestly it left a ringing in my ear. He apologised not realising it was going to come on again, but honestly it annoyed me because it really unsettled me. I drove round to the rough area that the hikers were able to tell me that they saw the figures, and I found absolutely nothing. The trees are quite dense in this area, and there's lots of shadows cast by the trees, so it actually becomes relatively difficult to navigate or see anything. Regardless of isolation, your mind will play tricks on you, and luckily for me, nothing was out of the ordinary. I decide to head off a little further now and leave the truck. I don't have a flashlight or anything because it's still quite early in the day at this point. I just decide that I need to go and see what's up. I'm not that far away from a stream which I actually find really peaceful, and I decide that after a while of looking, I'm gonna go and rest here for a little bit. I can't see anything out of the ordinary at first, I just constantly look behind myself to make sure that I don't get lost on my little journey. I proceed ahead but don't find much of anything, deciding that it's probably best just to go over to the stream and relax. Now the area itself is really beautiful. I decided just to stand off to the embankment and appreciate how beautiful this place is. If you're hiking, you can do a really nice loop around here, and honestly it's breathtaking. It's the kind of place that no matter where you take a picture, you could put it on a wall if that makes sense. I find a nice little spot and sit down, just on a rock that's out of the moisture from the ground. I take a few moments just to meditate and decide to be silent. This can actually be quite a good technique if you can't find anything on a search. That's because you're probably going to hear people if you can't see them, if there's any about. I start to think more and more that the hikers are just kind of losing it a bit and are just playing tricks with me, so I decide that I should probably head back. I then leave the stream and jokingly say goodbye, knowing that I don't want to leave this area so soon. I then make it back to the truck and I start off again in the direction that I've come. I radio in that I've not found anything, but I'll be coming back soon. I drive for about another 2 minutes and I spot it. Someone just standing there, staring off into the tree line. It's quite difficult to make out exactly what they're wearing, but they kind of look like a grey colour. They almost seem too still to be human, which I think's really odd. I stop quickly and before I get out, I decide to grab my binoculars. I then realise that I don't have them. Oh no, I've left them in the tower, I realise. I decide the best thing I can do is very slowly make my way over there instead of announcing my presence. I think it's odd they've not moved at all or really reacted to the sound of the truck, or maybe they didn't hear it. There can be an issue if it's like a lost hiker or someone who's hit their head and they're kind of shocked or not really in a normal state of mind. I realise that this person's probably about 5 feet tall and just standing there completely still. What's really odd about it is they almost look like they're covered in bones, if that makes sense. I slowly edge closer and closer and I can't believe what I'm seeing. I can see a person standing there perfectly still, but they don't look right. It looks like they're not wearing any clothes, but I can see them and they're right in front of me. I then get a little closer and realise that it's not a person at all. It's an arrangement of wood, perfectly resembling a person. I look to my left and I can't see anything else. I've just come from the right side, so I know I should be pretty safe to investigate. I very hesitantly make my way up to this weird thing, and it's basically a figure made out of wood and carvings to perfectly resemble a person. I think, there's no dead body at least. But who put it here and why? I think this is extremely odd, and it's still something that kind of scares me a bit when I think of it. I go to the other side and there's no face. I look up and my heart drops. There's 2 more figures further off, but they're more like people this time. I quickly duck down but realise it's futile. These people are standing there by the stream that I've literally just come from. They literally look like headless figures. I realise now that there's something really odd here, but I'm not sure whether they're people or not, or just more of these things. I can then see another behind and another. I realise then that they're forming a circle. I realise now that I'm not in too much danger and slowly make my way over. And I'll be surprised. They are wooden figures, just like the other one, just not very detailed this time. Standing there, placed perfectly while being still. It's very bizarre because their hands are relatively detailed and it really gives me the creeps. I look around for whoever put these here, but it's literally like somebody's just placed them out of nowhere. I think this is really bizarre. Maybe it's some kind of art project that I'm not aware of, but that doesn't make sense. I almost think for a second it's kind of cool. I take a moment to scour the horizon, and I can't see anything else and decide that it's really time to head back. I can't wait to report this in because this is really weird. I slowly begin making my way back towards the truck, and I take one last look at these things, and they haven't moved thankfully. I kind of expected them to move forward. I almost thought about for a joke bringing one on the back of the truck and just setting it up somewhere to scare the other guy that was working with me, but I think this is a bad idea, and I don't really want to get in trouble or get some weird reputation at work. So I decide just to head over and act like nothing was wrong and just say, hey, I'm coming over, sorry about the delay, on the radio. And then make it back to the tower and say, hey, I'm here, Andy. He says, hey, come on up quickly, and I make my way up. Now I haven't told him anything at this point, and he says, there's something weird. I keep seeing something white just off in the distance, sort of moving around and disappearing every so often periodically. I say, oh, I know just what that is. I've literally just come across some really weird sculptures in the middle of this forest. They look very much like people, but do you know about any art projects? Art projects? Andy laughs and says, no, of course not. Who would put them out here? He says, did you bring one with you? And I jokingly said, yeah, I did. It's right here behind me. And he says, no, cut it off. Did you actually bring one? I say, no, why would I do that? I tell him roughly where it is so he can go and investigate, and he says he's going to check it out later. He then says, seriously, did you see anything out there unusual? I say, yeah, of course, the figures, but he says no, any actual people. I say no, and that I'm pretty sure there's no bodies out here that we have to look for, and he hears that's a relief. He thinks too the hikers probably saw this and got confused and scared. Now, are you absolutely certain the hikers didn't leave these here? I say, yes, Andy, of course. I would have told you, and why would I have investigated? He said sorry for the stupid question, but he says he really wants to keep an eye out on this figure he saw. Now, at the time, he'd been working quite a few long shifts, and never reported anything like it before, so I say, come on, just relax. I think it's just the isolation getting to you, and he says you're right. He then hands over the reins to me once again, and we say our goodbyes. He says he's going to check it out on the way and takes the truck with him, and with that he leaves. Now I do keep my eye out for probably a good another 20 minutes trying to see anything out there, but I don't see anything at all. Every so often the trees kind of move, and I think this is odd, but I think it's just where I'm staring at it for too long. I look around in the rough area that Andy's drove off to, and there it is. A white figure just standing there perfectly. I really start laughing to myself, realizing what he's done. He's placed one of them wooden figures there, obviously to scare me. I think, you could have got me with that, to be honest. And I turn around and just completely ignore it. I then decide that I should call on him and make sure that he got back okay. And he did. I say, that was a nice little prank you did on me. And he says, what prank? I say, yeah, leaving that thing there. And he sounds very confused, and his confusion actually put fear into me. He's 100% certain that he hasn't done anything the type. He said, listen, all I've done is drove back. And I was kind of freaked out by that figure I saw earlier. That's when the penny dropped. There's definitely something up now. I say, I'm going to investigate it quickly. He says, please check in with me again, and I say, yeah, I will, I promise. And I quickly head down from the tower. I look up, and the thing's gone. I was certain I saw one of those wooden figures there earlier, and I feel stupid now going back saying that there's nothing there. I get on the radio and say, oh, don't worry, it's probably just nothing. I think it's just my mind messing with me from what you said earlier. I always thought I had an overactive imagination. And he says, yeah, just be careful, buddy. Something's definitely up. With that, the radio switches off, and I decide to lay down for a bit. Now, I was actually pretty bored most of the times up here, so I decided to do some drawings. I decide that I'm just going to draw the horizons and some of the landscapes around me. To be honest, this is actually quite good because it really keeps my mind active. It'd be really funny if I drew a big fire and didn't realise it until afterwards, right? But anyway, I start my drawings and keep checking out for any danger periodically again. And then I see it once more. There's a white figure out there, definitely moving and somewhat glowing. That was the part I really don't understand. It was literally illuminating some kind of light, or at least that's how it appeared. That's it. I have to investigate now. I quickly grab my jacket and put my pencil down and decide that I'm gonna have to figure out what's wrong here, because this is really odd. I'm much more cautious now because the night sets in, and my eyes haven't really adjusted to the darkness that well because I had a small lamp on so I could do my drawings. Now I get to the bottom of the steps and I start heading in the direction that I saw this weird figure in. At first I start jogging, then I realise how unfit I am, and I have to stop after about 30 seconds. That's odd. I've always been pretty in shape, but maybe I've just let myself go a bit. Who knows? I then go to the exact area where I saw this thing not 5 minutes ago, and there's nothing there. As I'm standing there, I can hear a faint laughter. It's really creepy because it literally sounds like a small child laughing. I suddenly feel very faint and realise that maybe there's a missing child out here. I have to figure out what this is now. I suddenly become more brave and start sprinting towards where I think the sound's coming from. I run and run and I don't seem to be getting any closer to the sound. I'm quiet for a moment and I can just hear the sounds of the nature and the trees around me, and I realise that something's wrong. Why has the sound stopped suddenly? Why couldn't I find it? Then, just ahead again, I can see some white figure just moving behind a tree. I decide that I have to jog over there now and figure out what this is. This time it doesn't move luckily, and I say, "Hey, I've got you," to myself, half expecting to find either somebody out here who's completely off their mind that's fell and hit their head, or maybe a lost child even, but this seems a little too big now. I sprint and get just to the edge of the tree and decide I'm going to jump out and shout freeze, just in case there's anyone dodgy. And I jump, freeze, nothing. Not a sound. I look around quickly and do a 360 and I can't find anything. I decide that I should get back to the station now and maybe call in some help, and I head out. I start picking up the pace and I can hear my footsteps slowly getting louder and louder as I'm somewhat panicking now and walking somewhat clumsily at more of a hiker's pace. Now I swear to you, as I got onto the first steps of my tower, that I can hear laughter again. I stop for a moment to confirm it, then very quickly start going up the steps. I get back in and radio in what I've heard, and that's when my friend Andy says that that's exactly what he heard too. A strange faint laughter, but he thought it was coming from me originally. He says unless you have 100% confirmation, there's not much he could do, but just to be careful and not worry too much. Be careful? That's great. How am I going to sleep at night now? I think. Yeah, I can lock the door off, but that's not really an effective way to stop somebody breaking in. Anyone could just bust the door in, or even set fire to this thing or knock it over or God knows what. I say yeah, that's fine, and I decide that I really need to figure out what's wrong here. I sit on kind of like the balcony thing where I can see around, but this is one-dimensional, mind you, but I don't see much of anything. I think maybe, just maybe, I've been out here for too long, and you know what they say, you can only see faces you've dreamt of. Maybe I was so tired I was kind of half dreaming and it was based off the wooden figures I saw before. But then I remembered, what were they? Why were they out there? Strangely enough, they seemed relatively similar in height to that thing that I saw. And maybe Andy wasn't actually seeing anything and there was a reason for me to be concerned. Now, I half fall asleep on top of this balcony again, and kind of hit my head to wake myself up, which is actually quite funny. I remembered laughing, think, well, there's my alarm clock, as I raised my head up, and just at the base of my tower, I can see a white figure somewhat glowing. I wipe my eyes and think, this cannot be real, this must be some kind of dream. I quickly look at my watch and I've only been asleep for about 10 minutes. In my dream, I felt like I was there for an eternity, but of course I wasn't. It was only a number of minutes. But I have to investigate now. I'm very convinced that my mind's just gone a little bit weird, and I decide to head down. When I take my very first step, I can hear something running. I think, right, I've got you now. I lurch forward but nearly go off the edge of the tower because I'm still not really woken up at this point, and I'm almost off balance. I manage to steady myself and much slower now make my way down. I say, hey. There's nothing. I then shout out another hey, again, and I'm met with silence. I'm actually getting relatively frustrated now, and I kid you not, I can hear the laughing once again. I spin around and I can see the figure. Now, through coincidence or not, it was actually heading to where I saw the wooden sculptures earlier. I didn't realise this at the time, but looking back on it is kind of weird. This thing is kind of sprinting off into that direction, suddenly not making any sound at all. And me being me, I sprint straight after it, thinking maybe it is somebody that's really off their head now and needs emergency medical attention or maybe an evacuation. I know if you hit certain parts of your head you can really lose it due to the brain swelling, but if you have brain swelling due to the intracranial pressure, you can easily die from it within a matter of hours, and if that was the case, then this person wouldn't have much longer left. So, I chase after them. Now, I'm struggling for direction at this point, but I can always see the tower, so I know roughly where I'm going. I never seem to be able to catch up with this thing, which is really weird, because based off the adrenaline I have and my long legs, I can sprint pretty quick. And it doesn't make sense for pretty much anything to be able to outrun me out here, especially because as a fire ranger I'm always out in the forest. I'm always going to have that edge of knowing the environment and being used to the terrain, but it didn't seem to apply now, which is really bizarre. It was almost like this thing had a supernatural ability to be able to just, I don't know, vanish at will. I ran as quick as I possibly could for as long as possible until eventually I had to catch my breath once again. Now I sprinted and sprinted until eventually I got to the exact spot that I saw this thing go to, just behind some of the trees and down a small hill, and there was nothing. Kind of worried that now something bigger than what I know about is happening. I feel pretty scared, and I just stop and put my hand into my head and just sit there for a moment. I realise now that I'm not really chasing this thing. Whatever this thing is kind of playing a game with me almost, and I'm not sure how to make it stop. That's when I see it. Some strange light just illuminating behind me. I stand up and turn around to see what it is, and for a few seconds I can see a very bright figure just standing there about 5 feet tall, too bright for me to be able to look at properly, literally hurting my eyes. And then I wake up off the floor. Now, what's really weird is that when I come to, it's not like I'm out of it. I'm immediately with my senses again, but something just feels different this time. The atmosphere just feels completely different. I get up and look around and realise that my eyes really hurt. Like when you've been staring at the sun for too long, like really bad. Even to the point that, you know when you've looked at something bright and it kind of lingers in your eyes for a second and goes weird colours? I still have that, just a little bit. I look up at the sky and I can still see the stars, so luckily I'm not blinded, so I'm happy about that. Now, in somewhat a state of shock and confusion, I look around and realise that lots of the scrubs and things on the floor have kind of burnt a bit. It's very difficult to describe, but it's almost like the life has been sucked out of them, similar to when something was burnt, but through heat but not fire, if that makes sense. And it pretty much forms a perfect circle around where I'm standing. I look down at my arms and they're somewhat sunburnt almost, appearing much more red than usual, and it's not on the other side of my arms too, which is really odd. I feel my face and that's completely fine, but my arms are quite burnt, which is something I've never experienced before. I look around and this thing is long gone. Luckily for me, there is evidence of this circle here, so I decide now that I'm gonna have to get back to the tower, and in a moment of clarity realise I should get a shift on and start travelling very quickly. In no time at all I make it back up to the tower and radio in what's happened, and Andy, bless him, comes over to see what happened. Upon arrival he says, "God, what happened to your arms?" And I can't really explain it in the moment and just say, "Look, you have to come here." I take him back to the exact spot where that flash was and I explain what happened, and he can't believe his eyes. It's almost like there was a small heat wave around this area only, and so much of the circle has died. It's only about 6 feet across, but it's all the same, and it forms almost a perfect circle. He says that he's going to radio it in and just to take a break for a moment, and that's what he does. I go with him back up to the tower, and he says that he's going to stay with me for the rest of the night to make sure nothing else happens, and that's what he does. I fall asleep quite quickly and I'm woken up by the pain of the burning on my arms. We make eye contact, and you know when your look can say 1,000 words? It's one of those moments. He just nods and we both know that we have to go back to that circle again. On the walk he tells me nothing else has happened but he really needs sleep, but we get there and thankfully for our sanity it's still there. The cover come over and we decided not to tell them what happened. We've already made a report about it and we don't want to scare them, and we need to confirm it's not only us seeing these things, and we say goodbye to them, and luckily Andy offers to drive me home. Now nothing ever come of that investigation, and we never saw that flash of light again. I'm still not sure exactly what it is, but it must be something paranormal. And what's really truly bizarre is that life never grew in that spot again. Eventually the ground just becomes somewhat sodden dirt, but nothing ever grew again. Literally for about another 10 years that I was working there. It still is and has remained one of the most unexplainable things that ever happened to me, and I can only really think of it as being paranormal, or some kind of supernatural energy that we're not supposed to mess with, and somehow I ended up doing so unwillingly. Now this is when I was only about 7 and we're camping near a spring we swam at often. Now I woke up one morning and went down to the spring to wash up, and there's a huge alligator that hissed at me from the bank. It was probably 20 feet long and easily 5 times my height. I stopped and ran out of there. Weird things happen in the Appalachian Mountains. They're as old as time itself, and people who have lived there may be the first to tell you that it can become otherworldly, and sometimes you just have to turn a blind eye for your own sanity, or you'll just be like, yep, this is just how it is. I grew up in a small town outside of Pishwan National Forest. Lots of waterfalls, hikes, great views. It's an amazing place to be, especially in summer. But what happened to me was in the dead of winter, when I was about 17. Before I write all of this, let me preface by saying at the time, I just got my very first prescription glasses and still wasn't really used to keeping them on 24/7. But although my vision was blurry, I know something just isn't right when I see it. When I was 17, I decided to do my senior project on nature photography. What better place to take some great photos of the forest? I said to my mother if she'd drive me into Big Ash and let me take some pictures as she winded through the woods. It was winter, so the trees were bare and the sky was grey. It was still fairly pretty out, to be honest, and I just wanted to take some pictures of the local flora. So my mum pulls over to let me walk down a trail that I'd been over hundreds of times. After a short walk through the woods, you end up on the riverbank, a great swimming hole in the summer, and the way the bank curved, you could walk along the little stony shore a little way past the trail. Mind you, I was wearing a bright orange raincoat, so it was incredibly visible. So I'm crouching down to take a picture of an old railroad spike that's been sticking out of the earth for years when, all of a sudden, I realise there's no sound. Like, honestly, it was really scarily silent. No birds chirping, no nature sounds or anything. It's like I didn't even hear the sound of water flowing. As this is happening, I realise exactly how visible and vulnerable I am. If you've experienced some kind of primal fear, you'll know what I mean. It's like an alarm bell's going off in your head screaming danger, danger. As I'm sitting there with this feeling washing over me, I start hearing crunching footsteps around. Again, all of the trees around are so bare that there isn't any foliage to block any view. I hear these footsteps slowly getting 2 feet closer and closer, and it's from the opposite side of the riverbank. I'm watching very closely and I can't move. Whatever I saw was all grey and not a human, but tall, and appears to be on 2 legs. It was getting closer and closer, and right as it's about to reach the bank of the river, I snapped out of the trance and really sprint. I've never been so scared in my life. I booked it back to my mum's car and was so obviously out of breath that she says, "What's wrong?" After I explained what happened, she looked really scared and said that while I've gone down the trail, she got this weird fear that suddenly something was wrong and was about to come and find me when I ran back. We left after that, and to this day sometimes we will talk about it with no explanation. I've told my boyfriend this story and he insists that it could have been a skinwalker. I've got no idea what it was, although I wish I'd gotten a better look. I'm glad I ran when I did. Has anyone experienced anything like this, or is it just me? My husband and his sister went hiking in September or November 2020 when this happened. They were hiking Sharp Top in Southwest Virginia. They hiked the entire trail without incident, but as they were coming down the trail back towards their car, they noticed a black, opaque figure at the foot of the trail near the road. This figure was almost opaque, but they see a white at the top where a face would be, but no other features. The best I can say second-handedly to describe it is a no-face from Sprint Away, but basically no facial features. It's roughly 5 or 6 feet tall and glided across the road to the tree line. Once it hit the tree line, it basically disappears. Now, it's weird too because it's soundlessly. It's fall, so there's plenty of leaves on the floor, so you would have heard something. He said they're roughly 40 yards away from it, but it was still light out for them to see fully what was happening. This was my husband's first experience with anything paranormal, but my SLL has experienced other things. We haven't found anything similar to this, but it was so weird. So in 1992, I went camping with 3 friends. We had all recently graduated high school. We're about 40 miles from the closest town in the desert canyon lands of the Utah border with Colorado. It was overcast, which made it so you can't really see further than your hand in front of the darkness. So we're sitting around a campfire having a beer, listening to the coyotes, when suddenly they really go quiet. I had a look at my friend to see if he notices it too, and he gives me a scared look, saying, "What the hell is that?" As I turned around and look up, everything seems to go dark. It really seemed silent for a long time. Even my thoughts were silent until eventually someone asked, "What happened?" My fuzzy brain remembered my flashlight. I turned it on and went to see why the fire went out. There was barely any coals. It looked like it had been out for a while and everyone was scared. There was this feeling that something strange had happened. Everybody agreed but couldn't think of what it is. I said to my friend, what do you think it is that he saw, but he couldn't remember saying anything. We're freaked out because the rest of the night, we really want the sun to come up, and I can't explain what happened. We weren't drunk. I felt like we lost time but have no proof. I've always had this nagging feeling that something happened that we can't remember. Something negative and probably scary. I used to work on the north slope of Alaska in the oil industry. The work we were doing required us to travel far out into the Alaskan Petroleum Reserve, which is basically just untamed tundra wilderness for hundreds of miles. The oil companies would build these long ice roads in the winter that would actually lead to exploration drilling pads. Now basically, our job was to go out after they finished the initial drilling and test rock formations for oil producing qualities. It was mid-January, the sun hadn't quite come up yet, and when I say the sun hadn't come up, I mean in almost a month and a half, and the polar nights are intense. This particular well site we're travelling to was about 60 miles west of Alpine, Alaska, really deep into the wilderness. Our job took a week, but we managed to finish and are heading back to our camp to finish up for our hitch and go home. Now at the beginning of the end, the ice roads are guard shacks that you have to go into and check out for safety. There's no cell reception or radios working, only up at a distance. So if you don't check in or out at a set time, they'll actually come looking for you to make sure you're okay. Now it's about 4 in the morning. Not that it mattered in the land of endless night, and we're halfway across the ice roads. Travel was slow with the speed limit on the roads only 25 miles per hour. When something appears on the road in our headlights, it was a man in jeans and a sneakers and a hoodie, walking down an ice road in the wilderness at 4 AM in -20. It's not really unusual for locals to go out hunting, but I don't know, maybe his snowmobile broke down and he's trying to get back to the guard shack. He didn't acknowledge us at all as our trucks rolled up next to him. He kept shuffling forward and doesn't seem cold. His clothing, which is completely not suited for this weather, appears warm and dry, so it's definitely bizarre at that moment. I roll down the window and say, "Are you okay?" He doesn't acknowledge us but just keeps going forward, face completely blank, devoid of emotions or thoughts really. The other guy in the truck suggested that maybe he was in shock and had an accident. I continued rolling my truck alongside him as he trudges down the road, still trying to get his attention. Even in this extreme cold, I could occasionally get whiffs of a peculiar smell coming off him. He smelled acidic, if that makes sense. There's just a lot of things about this guy that really make my hair stand on end. Now the guy behind me's in the truck's crew cabin actually had enough of this. He rolled down the window and reached out to grab the guy. He later said he was just going to try and shake him and get him out of it. Now before my friend could actually reach him, he suddenly spun around and latched onto my buddy's arm. He glared at my buddy and then at me with this look of pure rage, not removing his hand from his arm. If emotions had a physical temperature, this guy could have melted everything there. My buddy groans in pain as he tries to get free. Now at that moment the guy starts screaming in our faces. There was so much hate and rage and anger in that scream, it was really terrifying. I slammed on the gas and spun out on the ice for a second before catching the wheel. The popsicle dude still had a hold of my buddy's arm, was trying to pull him out of the truck. He was running alongside the truck while the other guys in the cab held on to my friend to make sure that he stays in. After several moments, it could probably have only been a few seconds at most, my body got free from the guy and we start hauling it, getting another 30 miles out of the road. We check in with the guards and report what we've seen, and the guard looks at us like we're pulling a prank, but policy said that they had to check it out regardless. My buddy's arm was sore. When he pulled back the sleeve, you could actually see bruises there. We filed a report with the guard and we're told to head back to the camp. None of us really wanted to talk about what had just happened, and the drive the rest of the way is really quiet. We flew home the following day. The next time that we saw the guard at his shack We asked him if he ever saw Mr. Popsicle again. He told us that they searched up and down for a solid 12 hours during their shift and never saw anything, not even tracks in the snow leading off or anything that would indicate anyone was there. He told us it was a good prank and that he'd get us back for it next time, but it wasn't a prank. Who would make up a story like that, and who would willingly bruise up their arm that bad for a prank? Now, that area of Alaska is a weird place, and my god did this experience scare me. Now, this past weekend, I was on a camping trip with some friends and my buddy, and we decided to go for a hike to scout for some elk because we're going to be hunting there next month when the season opens. So we walk through the woods and eventually wind up on 2 back roads. My buddy's carrying his daughter and we've got a couple of dogs with us. Then out of nowhere, we hear the crack of a rifle shot in the very distance and the sound of a bullet whizzing past us. We're about 10 feet apart, thinking someone's trying to shoot my dog perhaps. Maybe she looks like a coyote. I run up into the road clearing, screaming to stop shooting. I see a guy standing there with a rifle looking dumber than a box of rocks, so I pull out my pistol and tell him that he almost shot us, and he makes bizarre excuses. Now, he's acting like he's hunting for some kind of bird that's not actually here. It got pretty heated and he threatened me before my buddy told him to calm down. Plus, we had a kid with us, so this guy shouldn't have been pointing the gun in our direction. He then says, oh, he'll find me in town, even though he 100% is wrong in the situation. So my dad and grandpa like to fish and hunt a lot. One night they decided to spend the night on the river in the Appalachian Mountains. It was really late, and they said they heard these awful screams coming from the woods on the opposite side of the water. It definitely wasn't a mountain lion or anything like that. And my dad's a pretty big guy who doesn't really get scared easily, but in that moment he was absolutely frozen with fear, explaining the sound as absolutely inhuman. He felt like whatever it was wanted them to know that they were there, and that they weren't happy about it. It gives him goosebumps thinking about it. Now, we used to have a stationary caravan on a campground right at the Northern Sea. So basically, the campground's really small, and there was like 40 or 50 other caravans stationed there, and a few empty slots for people with tents. We stayed there for holiday one year, and for some reason, left a day earlier than we planned. On this particular night, someone got murdered right next to our caravan. It was 2 women sleeping in a rented one, and the ex-boyfriend of one of the women who went to the campground at night, stabbing his ex and her friend, then dragging them out of the caravan, and they passed away right next to our one. My brother and I were going camping together. We were kind of going through a bit of a rough patch, and it would help get our bond back together. We hadn't been camping for years and were somewhat excited to do so. We did it all the time when we were younger, and I guess not much had changed really. We had different lives, but we were still brothers, so we needed to fix our relationship. Now, for the first part of the trip, everything was going very well. We found a beautiful clearing to go and set up our camping site in, and that's what we done. As we head over, I noticed that my brother's hair was standing on end. I thought that was really bizarre, and before I can mention it to him, he tells me the same, and we think this is really odd. Both of our hairs are standing completely up on end, and there's a strange electric smell outside. We realise that we need to go back to the car to go and get something, so we both head back in. We ended up closing the car door and putting on the heating just so we could warm up. And I'm not joking, 1 second after turning it on, there's the loudest explosion sound of my life, and everything goes completely white, and I'm blinded temporarily. We look at each other in absolute shock and are frozen in fear. Then we hear the loudest thunder crashing immediately afterwards. We turn around and notice a fire next to our camping site. Our camping site has just been hit by a huge bolt of lightning and destroyed half of our contents there. We were literally only seconds away from death. I don't know what happened. I'll say the words and let them paint the picture for you to experience what I did. I'll set the scene. I'm an avid urban explorer and I always have been. I love nothing more than going to old abandoned buildings and seeing what I could find, but every so often you'll get far more than you're looking for. And luck would have it that one day it was going to be my turn too. Now I had a couple of friends of mine. I'm not going to say their names or my own, but I'll just call them Ben and Ryan. Now we would love going to these strange places that nobody seemed to really know about, and one day Ryan suggested a place that was really out in the middle of nowhere, and that apparently he'd only seen once before. It was an old house that apparently had quite a large basement area in it. This place had been abandoned for a long time, and I couldn't wait to get there and explore. Now the problem was actually finding the place. Now we had to drive for a good 4 or so hours to actually reach roughly where it should have been, and we were truly driving out into the middle of nowhere to get here. Now the drive was beautiful. It was a lovely warm summer's day, and the heat really made you feel comfortable. We're having a really good time making some jokes with each other and having a laugh generally. We ended up pulling up to basically exactly where the spot is supposed to be, and there's nothing there. A little confused, Ryan offers to walk off ahead of us to find the place. I sit on the trunk of the car with Ben and it's pleasantly warm in the summer heat. Now we truly are out in the sticks here with not much around us and not many sounds, just the odd crickets and maybe water bugs or whatever else is out here. We actually have to be careful of different scorpions and other animals like that. Eventually we can hear, "Hey, come over here, you guys have got to check this out." Excitedly, me and Ben jump up and go and see what Ryan's making fuss about, and there it is. Just off in the horizon is an old building. This thing was really big. Like, not a mansion, but just under the size of it, and it looks beautiful. If I had to guess, I would say this thing sat abandoned pretty much since the day that somebody first went in there. Now, I have this pretty nice feeling that's almost inviting, and it's something I can't really describe. It's almost like something was drawing me in there. The other two seem a little more hesitant than me to go in, but I'm really excited now. And we start making our way over there. While walking, I'm struck with how happy I feel. It's almost like a high that I can't describe. Almost like I was coming to something that I was truly belonging to. I look over to my two friends and they don't seem as excited as me, just more focused on getting there and somewhat hesitant. I laugh and say, "Hey, come on guys, it's gonna be fine. There's literally nothing to worry about. Come on, this is gonna be great." Now, as always, we never go through the front door, just in case there's anybody living there that's not supposed to be, or any kind of animals that are looking for food, so we decide to go around the back. This place has a beautiful porch and it's just really pretty. We realise that there's a window that we can prop open to enter, and I opt to go first. I slowly pry the window open and manage to pop it up. While opening the window, I actually get a splinter in my hand, but strangely I can't feel it at all. It's quite a big and nasty one too, and I head in. I then turn around to help my two friends get in too. I turn and say, "Come on, get in." And Ben's quite hesitant about going in, saying, "I don't know why, I have a really bad feeling about this." I say, "Come on, stop being stupid, it's gonna be great. We drove out here all this way and he reluctantly follows in, and so does Ryan. Now all three of us are here. Now the building smells old, but as I turn around, I'm suddenly struck by how nice this place is. It's basically a time capsule and it almost feels odd. I feel weirdly welcome and like I'm at home now, and we slowly make our way through the first room, out of the kitchen. Now there's no food of course, but honestly, if we open the fridge and see some, it wouldn't surprise me. My two other friends have started to warm into it now, and they're starting to enjoy the experience too. We decide that we're going to first explore the upstairs parts of the house, and then we're going to explore the ground level. We now come into a massive main hall or living area, which still has a chair there that looks like it's never been used before, and a really old clock. For some reason I keep being drawn towards the clock, and I'm not sure why this is. Of course it's sitting timeless, but it kind of emphasizes the feel of the whole situation. It really feels like we've stepped back in time at this point, and I just really feel welcome here and I don't know why. We decide that we're going to attack the upstairs and we all go up there, with me leading the way. I take a couple of steps onto the stairs and I almost feel like I know my way round. It's really bizarre, but I seem to kind of know the layout in my head naturally. We get to the very top and I first go into the bathroom. I look out of the window and it's really a beautiful summer's day, and the other two split off exploring some old bedrooms and things. I go to turn on the tap and there's no water whatsoever. I try and run the bath, but again there's nothing. I turn around and head over to my friends who are in the other rooms. They're inside the main bedroom now, and they're sitting on the bed. I lay on the bed and it's extremely comfortable. My friends say let's explore the other rooms, and I say I'll catch up with you in a minute. I lay back and for some reason I can't seem to help but smile. I feel really at peace now, and for some reason something's drawing me into the lower level of the house. Now I tell my friends that I'm gonna go and investigate further and they say okay, and I start heading down the stairs. I feel very happy and kind of glide down, almost like I'm in a dream. Now it's really bizarre, it really is like stepping into a museum or time capsule. Everything's just perfect, almost too perfect. I make my way into another room next to the kitchen, and I realise that there's a large picture frame here and a cabinet. I almost feel drawn to this spot and I don't know why. I go to move the picture frame in case there's something else next to it, like a picture that's fell off, and I realise that it starts to fall down. I quickly steady myself, bracing to catch it, and then I realise it's a door. I can slowly pull it open and it silently releases, and there's a stairway behind it. I'm looking into the darkness when I realise that there's a light switch next to me. I flick it and to my surprise, the lights come on, and I can see a little further down. The staircase winds down, and I slowly close the picture behind me on its hinges and close the door. I'm not sure why that I didn't tell my friends where I was going, but I decide that I have to press on and explore further. I make my way down the stairs and turn, and I'm suddenly met with a couple of doors in a large room. I can't believe how big this place is. I don't know what door to go to, but I seem almost drawn to one. It's the one directly ahead of me. I open it, and I'm met by the light from the switch that I've just turned on. There's just a single light hanging from the ceiling there, and more rooms. I think this is odd, and think maybe they didn't finish furnishing down here, or maybe it was some kind of bunker or I don't know what, but it's kind of weird. There's no furniture whatsoever here, and again, I'm drawn to keep going forward. I don't know what was in those other rooms to my left and right, but I open the door ahead of me, and I'm met with a very long corridor. It's almost impossibly long, and there's a light leading down to the end, but I can't really see what's down there. Maybe this was some kind of escape hatch or something, just in case there was an emergency, and it probably comes out somewhere else, and I think this is really cool and decide that I need to investigate it. And this feeling, I can't describe this feeling of being completely drawn into somewhere, almost like it was calling me to go further. I decide that before I go on, I should see what else there is, and I close this door. I then turn around and open another one to my left, and it's the same again, an empty room with 4 doors, which is actually very confusing to me. I continue ahead and I start to feel quite lightheaded. I think maybe the air's not so good down here, and I turn around and come out the one I've just went to, but there's nothing but more doors in here. Starting to panic now, I'm not sure exactly where I am, and I call out for my friend's name, but there's no reply. I do it again and I'm met with silence. I can now hear a scratching on the side of one of the doors that I've just come from. I hesitantly open it thinking it's them, and I'm met with that corridor once more. I feel absolutely drawn in this moment to go further down, and I hear a door close behind me. I turn around and for some reason I'm at peace once again, and I feel like I just have to go on further. I'm completely disorientated at this point and I don't really know how to get back, and I think my way out might be up ahead of me. I decide that I shouldn't go on without my friends, and I stare down into that corridor, almost in a trance. I don't know what I was looking for or looking at, but there was something there, and it feels like everything around me goes black and all I can see is the end of that tunnel and another door. I have to know what's in it, and I have to investigate it. But maybe, just maybe, I should get the others. I turn around now and come back in again. I go straight and straight, but become completely disorientated as I close the second door behind me and there's just more doors. I go to open the one to my left and I realize that it doesn't open. There's another one behind me and it's the same again. Now I think my panic might have set in finally, and I feel my heart beat through my hands. My hands are now shaking as I open another door and it's the same again. But this time, I know that it's going to lead me to the corridor because I can see the light coming down it, and now I'm really confused. I call out once again for my friends and I'm met with silence, and I swear every so often I can hear some kind of footsteps behind me, and that's when everything went black. The next thing I know, I'm being moved but can't see anything, and I'm being slapped with water poured over my head. I'm very disorientated and confused about what's happening, until then I realise it's one of my friends calling out my name saying, "You've got to drink this water," and I suddenly come through. I go to wipe my face and I realise that I'm absolutely drenched in a cold sweat, and they say, "Thank God, we thought we were going to lose you for a second." I can then see the car just up ahead and I feel very weak, almost like I can't move. I keep on seeing black sparks everywhere where I'm not with it. They hold the water to my mouth and say, "You've got a drink," and I nod and start drinking water like I've never drank before. I say what happened and they said, "We couldn't find you for hours. We were looking for you and getting really worried. Then we realised that the picture was off the frame and investigated it and found the way down that you went. We found you in the very bottom of the stairs, covered in sweat, with some big marks across your arm and on your back." I say, "What marks?" My friend then lifts up my shirt and points, and there's very large scratch marks on my back and on the backs of my arms. I can't believe it. I say, "How does this happen? What happened to me?" And they say, "We don't know. I told them I was screaming out for you guys, but you didn't reply." My friends then look at each other and say, "We didn't hear a thing." We just thought you fell over and got hurt." And now the three of us lock eyes. Without saying anything, my friend quickly gets onto the ignition and floors it, and we slowly speed out of there. As we quickly drive away, I then explain to my friends what happened as I'm more with it now, and then they give their story and look very scared. They say that I disappeared for literally hours without making a sound, and they kept calling out for me but couldn't hear anything, just some kind of laughter coming from somewhere else that they thought was me. I said laughing, no, I wasn't laughing whatsoever, and my friend Ben goes very pale suddenly. He then says, "Let's never go back to this place again. I don't know if we're alone in there." And we drive off, making the rest of the trip back until eventually stopping to get some food after 3 or so hours and more water. I pretty much felt fine again after this, and we put it down to me being extremely dehydrated, but we can't make sense of what happened. It doesn't make sense how I got lost, so lost down there. We agreed that something was completely wrong and that we vowed never to go back there again to explore it. Now, I don't know whether this house was designed like the Winchester Mystery House and some crazy person made it really confusing, but I don't understand what happened. I don't understand how I got so lost with such a simple thing to do, or why I felt so drawn down there, and I'm sure something was down there with me. One of my friends later on decided to go back with some of his other friends just to confirm that the place was actually there, but they could never find it. The scariest part for me is not knowing what happened to me, or how I got all of them scratches on my back, or what was at the end of that tunnel.